Hi, good evening everybody. Welcome to Housing and Environment. Thank you all for turning up tonight. Just run through the agenda. Just to begin with, fire evacuation. There are no fire alarms scheduled for this evening. Therefore, if the fire alarm sounds, please evacuate the building, and the fire exits are located at the rear and side of this room. Go down the stairs and meet in the War Memorial Park. Webcasting of meeting. I believe we are being webcast as we speak. Apologies for absence. Don't have any apologies as such, but we do have resignations and replacements. Before I go on to that, is the committee happy for Councillor Peach to serve again as Vice Chairman for the evening? I'm happy with that. Thank you very much. So we have, this evening, we have Councillor Parker here for Councillor Day, Councillor Miss Bean here for Councillor Mrs Court, Councillor Sherlock for Councillor Marks, Councillor Mrs Taylor for Councillor Leeks, and Councillor Harvey for Councillor Washburn. Have I missed anything or anyone? Yes, you are. Thank you, Councillor Bierman. Yes, I was warned. I was warned you might be late, so thank you for being here on time. Declarations of conflict of interest. Or whipping decisions. I'd like to just make a declaration. We do have a paper which is looking at landlord repossessions, and just for completeness, I'd like to mention that I am a landlord, although I've been advised it's not a conflict here. And to be entirely complete, I will also mention that due to my father dying recently, I have a half share in his house, which obviously currently is empty at the moment. But again, I've been advised this isn't actually a problem. So, are there any other declarations of interest at all? Lots of hands up. Right, Councillor Taylor.
As you've declared you're a landlord, I declare I'm one as well, but no conflict of interest.
I declare I'm also a landlord, but the same as you.
I'd like to declare that I'm a landlord with no interest.
I'm going to be the odd one out. I'd like to declare that I'm a tenant.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. There are no urgent items. Now, item number 7, to confirm the minutes. Committee, I hope, will understand that the minutes that we're referring to are minutes from both the meeting on the 17th of October and also the minutes of the meeting on the 7th of November. These are all going to be produced as one set of minutes. Due to the time in terms of actually getting the papers out and published in time for members to receive them for this meeting, the minutes weren't completed by that time, which is why we have no minutes for this evening. But I understand we will have them for the next meeting.
May I just sort of ask for clarification on that? I mean, is it because of the little difficulty, the little local difficulty? Because it just seems to me that this time between the two events should be enough to produce minutes, and there might be things that might be relevant to onlookers that is not clear yet because the minutes aren't published.
No, I understand your point, Councillor Bim. My understanding is that it was because the last meeting was on the 7th, and I believe the minutes were sent out the following week. Or rather, the agenda was sent out the following week for the committee, and there wasn't time to actually finalise the minutes. But are you happy to answer on that?
Just to clarify, the papers for this meeting were sent out on the 6th, which was actually the day before the continuation meeting on the 7th, which is why it wouldn't have been possible to include them.
Okay, thank you. Member and public participation. Sorry, beg your pardon. We do have a public participant, which we will come to on paper A, and we have, I believe, Councillor Tilbury, who wants to address us on paper B as well when we get to that. Standing invitation to portfolio holders. We have the portfolio holder with us this evening. Councillor Golding, who I believe is here to receive comments and to listen to the committee. Referrals from other committees. We have one referral which was on the tree maintenance strategy, so I'll just hand over to the officer for that.
Thank you, Chair. I have a statement here from my colleague. Subsequent to the motion having been requested, a budget of £470,000 has actually been earmarked within this budget round, due to be approved in February as normal, for the works outlined in the motion, and there will be a report to this committee early in the 14-15 cycle to determine how that money is spent.
Councillor James.
Is that 470k? Is that in 1 year? I understood it to be over 4 years. Thank you.
Yes, you're absolutely right. It is over a 4-year period, but the opportunity for the committee to determine the rate of spend and on what will come, as I've said, next June, July in 14-15.
Okay, thank you. Going over the page, there are no issues referred by the Cabinet. So we then come to item 12, which is a paper on severe weather arrangements for rough sleepers. We obviously have the officer presentation, and then we will come to our public speaker when we've had the presentation. So if I hand over to Kate, if that's all right.
Thank you. We were asked to bring a report back to committee in June of this year in relation to severe weather arrangements for rough sleepers. Back in June, I notified the committee that work was in hand to enhance and improve the arrangements in place for rough sleepers in the event of severe weather. I indicated that a lot of work was being done on rough sleepers, and indeed much has been done to get us to the point that we're at today. I do have 2 guests that will come to the table after the public speaker, and those are 2 of the participants that have been working on that piece of work. I'll introduce you when they come to the table. Just a bit of background context to the severe weather arrangements. It's part of the Council's overall emerging approach to No Second Night Out, which is a local strategic priority within the homelessness strategy. And the need to improve the severe weather arrangements for rough sleepers was identified following an increase from last year's estimate in 2012 that indicated that numbers of rough sleepers were increasing. We have done a lot of work. Much of that's referred to in the report. Work with setting up a homeless-focused task group, getting some funding from sub-regional monies from CLG, and engaging with the Camrose Centre to actually make sure that all the services for rough sleepers are starting to bed together. In relation to the SWEP specifically, outlined within the report that in simplistic terms, we've got preparatory arrangements, so we've got the dialogue that's happening all the time about our known rough sleepers. We have trigger mechanisms in terms of what happens to bring the severe weather arrangements into effect. And as you'll see from the report, we now have arrangements to set up 6 emergency beds that we didn't have available in the borough, which will be provided at one of the accommodation-based services, and that there'll be triage and prioritisation processes in place for people who present where people have always presented to at May Place, and from there they can be triaged to Mary Rose Court if they need an emergency bed. So I don't intend to talk sort of in much detail around what's in the report, and I do have the guests who will be involved in actually working through this as the SWEP starts to take place. We have incorporated regular reviews, and those will be happening at all officer levels, operational and at strategic levels, because this will be the first time we've operated any sort of arrangement like this. And we also have a professional seminar planned for next Wednesday, when we bring all the professionals together with other professionals from other areas that are working these type of arrangements already, so we can thrash out any anxieties, any issues that need to be worked through before hopefully the cold weather sets upon us. Although we are ready now, if we have a dump of snow tonight, we would be ready to bring the severe weather arrangements into place. And on that point, members are asked to note the contents of the report.
Thank you very much, Kate. If we can ask our public speaker, Mr. Pearce, if you're happy to come forward and address the committee. Thank you very much, Mr. Pearce. Thank you indeed. You have the usual 2 minutes, Mr. Pearce.
Is that on this? It is good, isn't it, that you've decided to take this this move to provide facilities for homeless people, and it is overdue. But nevertheless, I would suggest that it's a really, really good thing. There are one or two issues that I'd like to raise with you, though, and I am also connected with the Camera Centre. I can't really understand why you're only providing for 6 people, and you're saying that anything above 6 people are likely just to be refused. There's no provision for the possibility of them being anything up to 20 people. And I'm aware in other areas, and Reading's a good example, where they have 31 spaces. If there are more than 31, then they get put into a local B&B. And that would also mean that the risk assessment would need to be done a lot earlier than 7:30 at night. I think that is incredibly late on a winter's night to start assessing an individual who's then going to be placed in a bed, hopefully, for the evening. That brings me to the next point. Apart from it being too late, the assessments at May Place, they're moving down to Mary Rose Court. That's 2.5 miles by road, and it's certainly 1.5 miles if you were to walk it. Now, again, I think on a cold night, that's not the right approach. Either do the assessment at Mary Rose Court or provide a taxi. I also note that there's no suggestion of any hot food either that evening or the following morning. I mean, I could be wrong, I might have missed something, but not giving these people hot food in the evening and in the morning seems daft. Snow depth. These sort of schemes run elsewhere, and you're connected with Homeless Link. I'm not aware I've ever seen a connection that says or and that suggests that we'd have to wait for 3 inches of snow. It's just the temperature. That's my understanding. And finally, I notice the time's gone. I think it's odd that you seem to want to take a decision tonight, and yet Homeless Link are offering you a seminar on the 27th, which you've already mentioned. So those are my questions, and I don't have a supplementary. That was very good. Oh, I've got to stay. Oh,
Thank you very much, Mr. Pearce. Councillor Harvey, you had your hand up.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Pearce, can I ask, in terms of the Camrose, do the Camrose have an idea of the number of street homeless or homeless at the moment, particularly presenting at the day centre?
My understanding is there's a regular 20-odd people.
Thank you. And in terms of street homeless, you're saying 6 is not enough. What do you think would be? Would it be an appropriate figure, or is it a case of the emergency provision of B&B, so that any figure presenting could be coped with in that context?
I think that your second suggestion is the sensible one. That you have a limit. I think 6 is too few, but if you had 10, and that would be the rest would go into bed and breakfast, and it would be sensible. Therefore, also that's another reason for bringing the assessment forward to earlier in the afternoon.
Thank you, Mr. Pearce. Thank you very much. Did you want to say something?
One thing I had written down to say, but didn't say, is just that we've just actually undertaken the rough sleepers estimate this year. We did it on the night of the 11th and 12th of November, and there's an article going in the members' bulletin, the next members' bulletin. Camrose were involved in that rough sleepers estimate, and the official figure that we'll be sending off to CLG is 5 rough sleepers on the night.
Thank you. Thank you, Kate. I would suggest now, members, we go into any questions to the officers. So we just wait for the partners to come up.
So we did intend having May Place here tonight as well because they're integral to the arrangements, but unfortunately the relevant staff members off sick. I can introduce Verena Hutchinson, that's our supported specialist housing advice officer for supported housing, and Carol Harrowell from Stonham Housing Association, who is the head of client services and responsible for managing Mary Rose Court. They may be able to field some of the more detailed questions that you may have.
Thank you. Councillor James, did you have your hand up?
No doubt you know that I've got lots of questions, but I'll take them as and when you want, you can split them up. If I can just ask in relation to the actual protocol, it talks in the protocol about the relationship that there is between the different agencies, and it says in relation to the assessment that people will have to turn up between 7:30 and 8 to May Place for a referral. Why does it have to be as late as that? Is my first question.
The arrangements were put in place taking into account what we know are the habits of our rough sleepers, because the rough sleepers within the borough are known to us. And we've worked with workers at the Camrose, and Camrose have been involved in setting up these arrangements. And what we'll have to do is manage each night on the night of the sweep. So that's why it can't necessarily be booked in advance or arrangements in advance, because each rough sleeper's ability to find somewhere to sleep will change from night to night during the winter months. That's what we know of the activities of our rough sleepers from the work that we've done with partner agencies. So a timescale for assessment for that night's provision and in future nights was introduced into the sweep. As I say, this will be a moving feast in terms of whether or not there's any adaptations that will be made, because we haven't worked with any sort of arrangement like this previously. But we had to, if you like, scope out what we felt the best arrangements would be, taking into account what we know of our rough sleepers and how they present to us and how they presented to us over the years.
And then within the protocol, you talk about this facility won't be open to people who have not got a local connection. Why not? And how are you going to determine who has a local connection and who doesn't?
Our priority is around the local people within Basingstoke and Dean. So people who have a local connection will have priority. I have to say, we have 5. On a general night, there tends to be 5 known rough sleepers sleeping rough at any one time. Whether people are in and out of transitory arrangements may be one thing. We have set this level to be proportionate compared to what other similar districts are arranging. So we don't necessarily anticipate that priorities will be made and people will be turned away on the basis of, being more than 6. If there are more than 6 and we need more than 6, we'll have those arrangements in place where we can convene and work out a plan of action to deal with this. I have to say, bed and breakfast for rough sleepers whose needs may not be known is inherently risky, and we know from the experience of our neighbours that did that last year, there are significant adverse outcomes, particularly for service users, and that was not a road we wanted to go down. It's nothing about not using bed and breakfast. We wanted to make sure that there was a safe, warm environment where skilled and experienced staff were available to help manage the issues that would be presented.
If 9 people present at May Place at 7:30 who have a local connection, what do you do with the other 3 people? How are you going to accommodate them? And there is 10 degrees below or something outside. What is the arrangement?
We don't anticipate there would necessarily be 9 people. I mean, Camrose work with the rough sleepers. They see them at least twice a week in their drop-in centres and are already working with the rough sleepers in the area to map out what their plans might be for winter. This is about emergency provision for those who on the night are left with absolutely nowhere else to go. And this is not something that the borough is saying or the council is saying this will work. We have worked up these proposals with the Camrose and Mary Rose Court and May Place. I hope that doesn't happen. If it does happen, we'll have to make arrangements to deal with that, given the networking that we have in place to deal with that. We're not saying, we wouldn't be sending people out into the cold. That's not what May Place are about, and that's not what Mary Rose Court are about.
So can I ask, is that a guarantee? If we have 9 people that turn up on one of those evenings and there isn't provision, because we've only got provision for 6, you're giving a guarantee that you won't be sending them out into the cold. Is that what you're saying, Kate?
I'm saying we have 6 emergency beds that we think are proportionate. There will be certain caveats to any provision around behaviour and substance misuse. So I could never give a cast iron guarantee that people might not be refused a service, but we do not anticipate having 9 people. At this point in time, we don't anticipate having 9 people that we will have to place. We think six is proportionate.
What I said is, if they don't have a local connection, if they don't have an alcohol or abuse, substance misuse, or if they don't have a behavioural issue, and 9 people turn up that don't meet that criteria, are you saying that you will accommodate them, or will you turn them away? That's what I'm asking.
We already have a floating support team who are working in the borough. Our floating support team will be actively making connection with rough sleepers, during the day. So if we find people who need reconnection, we'll be working with them to reconnect to another area. We will know earlier on in the day if we've got people who are likely to be presenting as emergencies for that evening, so we will make every effort to find them suitable accommodation. We already work with the Winchester Night Shelter. If we were in the position where we had somebody, over and above the numbers that we were able to work with, we would be discussing with them options. Our options are predominantly to try and keep people safe. We want to prevent death. That's the aim of the provision. And if we find over time that there are higher numbers of people than we anticipate at the moment, we'll work together and sort it. May Place are very happy to work with us on any individuals over and above the 6. They have already said that they won't be able to provide beds for them, but there would be space in their foyer to keep them out of the cold. So we're confident that provision will be made in some form or other. It may not be ideal, but it will keep people off the street.
Thank you.
Sorry, Councillor James, sorry to interrupt. Is that the end of that particular question, or have you still got a question which is exactly related to that one?
It relates to that question. So the guarantee is that if there are people that are meeting the criteria that you lay down in the report, they will have somewhere to stay overnight if there is cold weather. That's what you're saying.
To reiterate Kate's point, I don't think we can make any guarantees. There will be people that present who are not suitable to be accommodated. There will be people who are under the influence, whose behaviour is so risky that it would be unsafe for them to be accommodated with other individuals. So I'm not going to sit and say we will house every single person that comes through. We will house everyone that we can, bearing in mind that we will risk assess, and that's with liaison with the U Trust. Hopefully during the day we'll understand what those numbers look like so we can make alternative arrangements where possible. It's certainly going to be a lot better than the arrangements that you've had in the past.
Thank you. This last one there, and I'll come back later, but it was in relation to, Kate, in relation to the DCLG and the good practice guidance in relation to development of a SWEP. Is this protocol in line with that guidance?
Yes, it is, and in conjunction with Homeless Link as well.
Homeless Link it is in guidance with Homeless Link, and they're happy with this protocol.
Yes, they are, and they'll be at the seminar with us next week.
I met this afternoon with Homeless Link. I met with the regional director, Sarah Gorton, and what she says is, my concern with the protocol is the implementation of running throughout it is that some people will be prioritised as the most vulnerable, and that it is acceptable that others are left out. SWEP should operate outside the usual eligibility, and people with no resource to public funds, no local connection, or people who have banned should be brought in, as when it is cold everyone is in danger. It would be preferable if the protocol made reference to arrangements such as placing people in bed and breakfast or putting additional beds in May Place if there were more than 6 people and would otherwise be sleeping out. And she goes on in relation to risks. So clearly, until I showed her today, she hadn't seen the protocol.
So is that finished then at that point, Councillor James? Thank you. Yes, we'll go around. We'll see who else has questions, then we'll come back to Councillor James. So next one is Councillor Bierman.
Thank you. I just want to go to the earlier question, just ever so briefly, if I may. I'm glad that the Camrose Centre has been involved to the extent that they have, because they have a lot of experience. I must admit, from my rather peripheral involvement with them, I am surprised, as our public speaker said, that we're talking about quite so few, but if that's what the experts say, and if Camrose are endorsing that, I hesitate to argue. Just a very simplistic query, though. We're not talking, I understand why bed and breakfast isn't suitable, but we're talking about relatively simple provision at Mary Rose, i.e. basically, as I read it, a camp bed and a sleeping bag. And is it that much more difficult to have 10 camp beds than it is to have 6? Because it's not a sort of massive enterprise. We're talking about something that's at a very simple and basic level. And for the sake of having those ready and available should the need arise, it seems to me just simple to have a few more. That's all I'm asking. Unless you're saying that spatially Mary Rose Court couldn't cope with 10. Is that it? Right, okay, well, perhaps one needs to think of another venue that might accommodate another 4 or whatever, just as a suggestion.
We aren't awash with venues that would necessarily make suitable provision, because the key is getting the experienced staff who are already on site. You know, if we are in a position where we're inundated with almost equivalent to a civil emergency, because 9, I don't know where the figure of 9 came from, but that would be quite unprecedented, I think, for people presenting at May Place, from what May Place have told us. Then we will have discussions corporately with the civil emergency arrangements, because we cannot expect supported housing provision to accommodate anything over the numbers that they have undertaken to do. So as I say, this is the first time we'll be running this. It is an improvement on last year, and we need to see what happens as it happens and deal with that accordingly.
Thank you. Councillor Parker.
Thank you, Chair. Very interesting to really note that the member of public's questions very much reflected my own first half a dozen questions, just to put you on notice, Chair. What I'd ask the officer to do, please, is perhaps just, because I think it would be very helpful for a better understanding. Within the report, we've got stage 1, stage 2, stage 3. I'm trying to understand where does this assessment sit? If I'm reading the paper correctly, there would appear to be a rough sleepers support team who locate the persons that would be potential candidates. and they sort of work up a target list. We have here a target list. Then those persons are invited to attend May Place at what appears to me a most unreasonable time of the day, and with only a half an hour slot. And I doubt very much if these people are known for punctuality of appointments, for their assessment, and then as the member of the public so eloquently made, that they've then got to find their way 1.5 miles to somewhere else. So could the officer just talk us through that? If that's correct, that's fine, but if I'm wrong and there's some other way, and I'd like to ask, I didn't see in the report any indication of the nature of the assessment, other than it says what the criteria is. If I've missed it, well then I'm sorry, but I wondered what exact data they're being asked to provide in that 30-minute slot in order to be assessed, other than whether they can stand up or on their own means or not.
Unfortunately, the detail of the assessment is something that May Place would have been able to outline for you. I think what I'd rather do is get a written response to you from the experts, just to detail what that assessment would involve. In terms of turning up between 7:30 and 8, then part of the reason why the arrangements were set with a funneling towards, who would, when these time slots would be allocated, is that we need to speak to our rough sleepers to let them know that if they haven't got a provision by that time of night, May Place is somewhere where they can go. From my understanding, with the 24-hour waking cover, May Place is always open and always receives people and will always give them food and support. So, but it's about making sure that rough sleepers are aware that if they find themselves in these cold weather situations with no recourse to a bed for the night, that is where they should direct themselves at that time of night. I'm not saying that they would be turned away at all, but we need to try to structure arrangements so that staff know what are happening and that people get used to this way of working. If we need to, change and adapt as the winter goes through, then we will do. But this is about setting out the model that we have in place for this winter, and then reviewing and adapting as we move forward.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just trying to visualise the lobby area of May Place, with the residents that they have already in place choosing to move about, and with people who are last minute trying to resource some sort of sanctuary. So I can follow Kate's explanation, but I'm wondering whether that's necessarily totally appropriate. I would have, well, I'll talk about that later. Could I then just ask, on the assessment that was carried out for numbers, when was that last, did you say when that last assessment was carried out, when you arrived at the figure of 5?
The night of the 11th and the 12th of November. And the methodology followed DCLG and Homeless Link's best practice, and that was the methodology that was adopted for coming up with that count and verifying the count.
Thank you. Do you think there's any possibility that you failed to locate some of these persons? My experience within the central East Rock ward, which I would suggest possibly the majority of these persons choose to try and find somewhere to get out of the elements, there's a possibility that for some period of time they do so and remain undetected.
We followed best practice methodology, and we're satisfied that that figure is robust.
Councillor Parker, may
I just wanted to say to you, I have other questions, but I'll give way.
Thank you very much. We'll come back to both you and Councillor James. So next on the list we have Councillor Peach.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, first of all, I'm just obviously encouraged to see the level of joint working that's happening here, and obviously it's nice to see that there is a prevention methodology being put in place. So thank you for that. Just to pick up on the bed element, if we offered, say, double the beds we're suggesting, so well, not quite double, but up to the 10 that was said. I've heard one reason why that perhaps couldn't happen is physically the space is not there. But is there any other reasons, perhaps, why that couldn't happen?
From a provider's point of view, I would be concerned about a single member of staff working with a significant number of rough sleepers who we have limited information about, as well as the existing property houses other vulnerable adults. We've made some significant adaptations to the building to be able to make access areas to the rest of the property as difficult as possible, so that we will be able to provide a self-contained accommodation for the rough sleepers. But I would be concerned if we had more than 6 within that small space. I think it would be potentially risky for the staff and other clients living in that property.
There's probably 2 follow-on questions from that as well, actually. If that is the case, let's say, I know you've done your studies and they all seem to be following correct methodologies, but if there was more people, do we have any alternative venues that could pick up that addition?
If we were talking more than 6 that we couldn't accommodate, and we felt that we had to provide some more beds, we would then be talking rest centre scenario. So we would do that under our civil emergency procedures.
And in terms of the 6 being there, and obviously I think you mentioned 1 member of staff. If I could imagine you may be able to exclude someone if from knowledge they demonstrate, let's say, aggressive or violent behaviour. But if on the night someone is demonstrating that behaviour, is there a risk assessment in place or a methodology to help that person manage the situation?
We've used Mary Rose Court specifically because within that service we already have a member of staff who is sleeping. It's nearly a 24-hour provision, and it certainly has a sleep-in provision within the existing accommodation. So the SWEP arrangement is supplementary to our service, so the member of staff who's working with the rough sleepers has got another team member who they can call in an emergency.
And I did read it in there, but just to confirm, there is obviously differential between someone who perhaps is, like I say, aggressive, or compared to someone, or perhaps, not saying everybody who's homeless is drinking, but perhaps someone who's come in there a bit drunk doesn't necessarily exclude them from the scheme. I mean, I'm assuming that's the case.
Our work with the U Trust Mayplace has been around identifying those people who are the happy drunk, who will come in, have a kip and be fine, and the ones that in their experience are the ones exhibiting most risky behaviour, and that's what the risk assessment will determine. Is this somebody who, although they're under the influence, will be of no issue to other people, or have they got a history? We'll also, as part of that risk assessment, do some understanding of the dynamics within that group. Because there may well be 2 people who are rough sleepers who actually don't like each other and may exhibit that in a particular way. So though that knowledge and understanding will be part of that assessment and triage process within Mayplace.
Good, thank you. It's obviously very encouraging to hear, the expertise that's taken on this responsibility. 2 slightly softer questions. The first one is, in terms of the 3 inches of snow criteria, how is it measured? Because obviously it can be slightly different in different places. And to determine whether 1 inch of snow is more dangerous than 3.
Can I tell you why we included that? And it hasn't been a feature of other SWEPs, because we were conscious of what happened in Basingstoke with the snow dump. I can't remember how many years ago it was, that with constant reference to just cold temperatures, we were missing out a potential scenario where you could get a sudden a dump of snow that people hadn't necessarily foreseen. And that's what we were trying to gauge. Like I say, this is a live moving protocol that will be reviewed. But we had to put our stake in the sand, if you like, and this is the protocol that we've arrived at. No, snake in the snow.
Okay, well, there was some quick final questions. As I say, it's slightly softer than the others, but this is, I was just looking at the provision list of what someone might have, and just picking up on the member of public comment as well, is perhaps something as simple as soup could be added. I know it mentioned a hot drink, but that's...
It's a real shame that May Place aren't here, actually, because they would have been able to talk through the arrangements that they have in evenings and the sort of assistance and support that they will offer. And then there are the supplementary arrangements as well, on the Tuesdays and the Thursdays at Camrose. So it's about networking in and making sure that people are aware of different facilities that are available. The issue about using this to keep people alive is that's exactly what it is, and it's an opportunity to engage with rough sleepers. And to be blunt, if the provision is too soft, then it won't encourage people to come out of the streets, because essentially this is a potential gateway option for persuading people to make that hard journey off the streets. And that's why it's been framed in that way, and for no other reason, because part of eradicating rough sleeping is about challenging that rough sleeping behaviour, and that's something that we will be working with the Camrose with.
Yeah, thanks very much. As I say, thanks for answering those questions. I think it's positive to see I think we're going in the right direction, that's for sure. Thanks a lot. Cheers.
Thank you. Councillor Waldridge.
Thank you. I too have got about 6 or 7 questions. So if I start with 3 or 4, and then firstly, the budget. The paper mentions a budget of £10,000. Are you sure that's going to sort of meet? Obviously it depends on the winter. If we have a really long and cold winter, how do we know that that's going to be met within existing budgets? And have we got a contingency budget that we could look at should it be necessary? And I know it mentioned about potentially Stonham applying for other money as well. So if maybe you can deal with that first and then talk about the budgets, that'd be great. Thank you.
The 10,000 cost included the setup costs, which have been already funded and underwritten by us, although we are looking at other avenues to recoup some of that. So that included the physical works to May Place. It's also based on Mary Rose Court. It's also based on Carol's assumptions on what the additional support costs would be to provide that support, which we will underwrite. Budgetary considerations will not stem the arrangements that we put in place. If there is additional budget, we will use homeless prevention monies in order to keep those services going for the length and the duration that it needs to.
Just to supplementary to that, because linking into what Carol said earlier about the need, there only being one sort of person sleeping in, and if there were, say, for example, 2 during the worst, if there was a lengthy period of cold weather of, say, 2-3 weeks, and you needed sort of 2 people to cope with potentially more people, would that have budget implications that potentially could put it above that, or would you feel that could be met through the prevention budget?
Yes, if it required additional support services to make that provision safe, then we would be talking to Stonham, and but Basingstoke and Dean would be looking to fund that through homeless prevention money.
So budgets are not going to be an issue here. Okay, thanks. That's my first question. The second question is about trigger mechanisms, which Councillor Peach briefly sort of touched on. The Homeless Link best practice guidelines here does, mention lots of weather conditions like high, strong winds, cold winds, frost, and all these sorts of things. And I just wondered how you'd come to your thinking behind what the criteria you decided, sort of 3 degrees for below 0 for 3 consecutive nights and this snow thing, because surely there are other weather conditions which can be equally as harmful to people's health as those particular two criteria we've decided on. So just comments on that.
You're right. I think once SWEP is in, then the severe weather arrangements which trigger SWEP would need to be adapted. For instance, in the recent forecast winds, we took a decision whether to invoke SWEP, and we decided not to because of the particular risk presented by that weather arrangement. And we had arrangements with the outreach support workers to make contact with all the rough sleepers, to warn them about the weather and to make safe arrangements, and all of them reported back that they had sort of safe and secure arrangements. So I think it's about being pragmatic. We've set the trigger mechanism down, within the protocol. If we feel that there is a need to review that and incorporate any changes, then that's exactly what we will do, because this is about basically keeping rough sleepers alive in those type of weather conditions that are life-threatening.
A supplementary to that then is that I would prefer if the guidance was reflected that, the pragmatic approach that you just mentioned there, because if agencies read this protocol, and they might not think to refer people unless it meets these two particular criteria that are mentioned here. So if the pragmatic approach on flexibility of trigger arrangements were incorporated in that, I would be much happier with that. All right, my third question at this point. Where should we go? Which one should we go for? I've got further questions really about the appendices, because we have, been mentioned about this second night out response and when we're going to see this. And I notice it's just been attached as an appendix tonight, and I personally would like to discuss this in much more detail. I don't know if tonight is the night, but the flow chart that we've got here on Appendix 4, I've got some very detailed questions about that. Is this going to be coming back to committee for or in another format, or is this our one chance to discuss this tonight?
Thank you, Councillor. Now, my understanding is it will be coming back. This is part of the consultation. Is that correct?
The request in June was to review the severe weather arrangements. No second night out is the context to the severe weather arrangements. I guess that would be a decision for the committee if it wanted to see something subsequent coming back, and what exactly it was. The no second night out was put there as an appendix to set the context.
In which case, because I have raised it in quite a few meetings over the last year or so, the last 18 months or so, because I'm aware that you've been meeting with the other local authorities about it, Hart, etc. I'd be interested to know how you come up with the flow chart, because for me it makes no mention of any statutory duty you may have to single people here within that, really, apart from where does it say it? It's basically say you'll assess for statutory duty, but it doesn't there sort of lead off to another sort of arrow, placing them in bed and breakfast if they've got a statutory duty. It just goes straight. The expectation is they'll go into my place, which I was quite surprised that there wasn't another channel for them. So that, and then I've got also questions about the Jigsaw Plus scheme. It's the first time I've ever heard of this Jigsaw Plus thing. And again, it's something that I've been mentioning. When are we having a deposit scheme for single people? I've mentioned that a couple of times, I think, Kate, you. So, these are questions I'd really like detailed answers to, if I can. Whether tonight's the night, I don't know, but I'd like a chance to come back to that. So.
Well, I can answer the question about statutory duties, because the statutory duties are set out in statute, and if we are under a duty to provide interim accommodation pending or in full discharge of duties, then that will be followed. It's not part of the no second night out. This is for people who may be rough sleeping that aren't entitled to a statutory assessment. If you want details about Jigsaw Plus, I can send that to you in a written answer, as well as the arrangements that can be made. There isn't a generic comprehensive rent deposit scheme for all single people, but some assistance may be available for some single people, and we can detail that in a written response as well, if you like.
Thank you. Are you happy with that now, Councillor? Thank you. Councillor Harvey next.
Thank you, Chair. Can I push you a little bit on the local connection point? I'm surprised at the guidance that we've got given and seen from HomeLink and the DCLG and their best practice, and the number of variances and differences between what is in the guidance and what is in the protocol. Our protocol isn't in tune with it at all from my reading of it on a number of points, one of which is the local connection bit. And obviously, in terms of SWEP and what they say in the guidance here, my question relates to this, is the fact of dealing with people who have been previously banned or people who have issues such that they are not put out on the street. And then obviously the issue of local connection. How does somebody prove to you they have a local connection if they're homeless? Because they're not going to have a gas bill, they're not going to have a passport potentially, unless they produce their birth certificate. How can they prove they're in Basingstoke if they're homeless? How do you test someone's local connection in that context, is what I'd like to try to understand. And even if they're not, but they are street homeless in an emergency situation, surely we should be able to deal with them and support them, shouldn't we? Question mark.
Yes, and that's why SWEP forms part of a whole bigger sort of context of no second night out reconnection protocols and all the work that has been undertaken on rough sleepers. I will be open about why the local connection stuff is in there, because we wanted to ensure that the arrangements that we set up from the outset are around accommodating or looking after our local rough sleepers, rather than being necessarily a magnet for people to move here if they feel that Basingstoke and Deane has a Rolls-Royce rough sleeper service and other areas or surrounding districts haven't put those arrangements in place. So from the outset, that was the intention of saying that the SWEP arrangements will be prioritising our known local rough sleepers. Now, what may well happen on the night if someone has surfaced at May Place, there won't be people won't be necessarily refused and turned away because they have no local connection. But what will happen is that the very next day those reconnection arrangements will kick in, and we have to take this as a pragmatic moving feast, if you like. And a difference around the emphasis on local connection is there specifically for a reason, because May Place is the only direct access hostel in North Hampshire, apart from I think Test Valley has a small one, and this was about prioritising local resources for local rough sleepers.
Thank you, Kate. I appreciate, the protocol is a big step forward for us, and it is good and it is important, and it's important that we get it right and we do the best we can with it, which is why, obviously, teasing these questions out, and thank you for your answer. The issue for me is, again, it's the numbers, because we've heard tonight that the Camrose deals with a lot more than 5 people, and simply the idea of there being just 5 people in Basingstoke who are street homeless on your count, to me, there's no relationship to the evidence that many agencies and many others have had conversations with. And that's an issue for me, as to the numbers, because I just don't believe that 6 will be enough. And if we're then into these assessments and issues, it's what we do in those circumstances. And others' questions around this table have teased out, I think, a need for a much clearer understanding of what we do if we have more than 6 and where it is safe. So for me, understanding the actual numbers is important, and the discrepancy between what the Camrose is seeing and what you've counted is important. And then just understanding this point about risk, Kate. My first question in terms of risk is that, again, the protocol is very, very clear that those individuals who are involved here, either through the verification process, identifying those most in need and then dealing with that, and those involved in, as it were, the overnight provision, should be trained and supported, personnel operating with SWEP, suitably trained and resourced to deal with the risk, such as alcohol, such as substance abuse, and such as dealing with people who may have a history of violence. There needs to be some sort of, I think, reassurance for me in terms of the risk assessment, that even if there was somebody who was drunk, and even if there was somebody who had an issue, that we wouldn't simply turn them away, that there would be some way of managing the situation so they weren't put out onto the street.
That's the reason why we've got the seminar next week, because the experts will be, the Homeless Link are the experts, and they are very well experienced in arrangements that can be put in place when people for example, may have a physical dependency to alcohol, how that can be managed. I wouldn't necessarily have the answers to those questions. The whole purpose of the seminar is for people who do have those answers to come to talk to people who will be working with this for the very first time. And this will be an organic protocol and way of working. It is, as you say, a progressive step forward, and we were quite pleased with the extent of that step forward. It's never to say that this is set in tablets of stone, and it has to be reviewed because we have to make sure we have proportionate arrangements that are safe for service users and for staff. So, absolutely take on board those comments, and that's what we're aiming to work with.
It's always difficult writing something, I appreciate that, and it's always difficult trying to come up with a set of rules. And when I read this, it was the sense of where's the humanity in this? Where's the sense of where are we going with this? Because your explanations this evening are far better than what you've written down in here in some respects. And I want to take away from this meeting this evening the things that you've said in relation to the tests for the trigger, the tests in terms of how we deal with people and all of that, and the fact that this is going to change next week. In some ways, it would have been nice to have I know time is as such, but to have the seminar next week and this tonight is a bit cart before the horse, but I understand that in terms of dates of meetings. So if this is going to evolve, I would like to see those sorts of elements included in here, which leads me to my last question, Chair. There's a bit in the protocol, Kate, about staff, and I need to know partnerships, and it's the last paragraph. The council's street care operatives will be made aware of arrangements, advise rough sleepers about where they can go for help. What I'd like to know is, have we had consultation with the staff? Have we had consultation with the unions about that work? Have those staff been given changed job descriptions to cover that request and that element of work? Have they been trained, or will they be trained, and will they be skilled to do that and give that advice if it is particular? Because they may well be asked questions by people and whether they can respond, and how do they deal with somebody who may well have issues. And then the final bit really is the risk assessment of that for our staff. Do we have risk assessments of staff? Because in this, it says there are no HR implications, and obviously there are. The report says there's no HR implications, but obviously there are if we're asking our street care staff to do that. So just from our point of view as the borough, I'd just like to see that rounded out and just secured really to make sure we're okay.
Just to clarify, we're not asking street care operatives to do that outreach work. That is a specialist area work. It's just about telling street care operatives, as we would any member of the public, if you see a rough sleeper, this is what you need to, this is where you can report it, whether it's to a line manager, whether it's back, and that information will be cascaded down through the management processes. It's just making sure that they're aware. No, they won't be doing specialist outreach work. That is a very skilled area of work.
I know it is, and I'm sure it is, and thank you for the answer. In which case, can I suggest that paragraph needs to be reviewed, because what you've just said compared to what's written in here isn't the case, so we just need to look at that again. Thank you for the answer, because I'm very much reassured.
Thank you. Now we have Councillor Taylor.
Thank you very much, Chair. First of all, I just want to say I really do appreciate this move. I appreciate what's been arranged. I think it's a big step forward, and I can see that a lot of work's been put into it, so thank you. And I hope and trust it'll be sufficient. But just suppose there's an out-and-out unforeseen emergency, and something goes wrong with the weather, and perhaps like Councillor James says, there are 10 people in dire need who come forward. I personally believe that in situations like that, or in any situation, we shouldn't always just look to the council to do it. I think that we all pay a limited amount of council tax, and I don't think we can then just say that's that job done, wash my hands of it, and it's all over to you. I think we all have a responsibility to look out for people in need. Councillor Harvey talks about where's the humanity. Well, actually, the humanity comes from us, first and foremost. So looking to ourselves to solve some of those problems. Around the town, for instance, there are several churches with church halls, etc. And I'm perfectly sure that several of them will, and if there are people in danger of dying, they'd open their doors. Of course they would. Is there any possibility, though, of perhaps an experienced overseer being supplied to oversee each venue if there was a real emergency, bearing in mind that people of good intention don't always have the skills to deal with some of the problems we've been talking about with these people? Would that be a possibility that could be put in the mix in a dire circumstance?
I wouldn't rule anything out because I would view something of that scale as being akin to a civil emergency. So we would need to adopt that sort of corporate crisis management style approach, and that sort of problem shooting in terms of what we needed to do as and when it occurred. So as I say, it's an interesting suggestion. I wouldn't rule that out.
And if there were enough good-intentioned people who'd be prepared to oversee, that would be an ad hoc thing, and in a sense it almost wouldn't be your responsibility. I mean, I'm just hearing what Councillor Harvey and all sorts of people have said. We can create red tape till the cows come home, can't we? But when there's an emergency, if there are people who want to help, could they do it?
I think actually how we engage the voluntary sector is a question that we can put with Homeless Link next week to actually tease out some of the best practice issues, because yes, everyone, there is a lot of humanity, but humanity has to be exhibited safely for everyone, for service users as well as people with the humanitarian intentions. So I think that's some interesting things we'll take forward to next week.
Thank you. Councillor B.
Thank you. It's a couple of quite simple questions, really. Just picking up on the guest speaker in terms of where the assessment is held and then where they're referred on to. I'm obviously taking what you've said. It's 2.5 miles by road and roughly 1.5 miles by foot. How will if they're referred on to May Rose Court, how will they be getting there?
I think that very much depends on the time, because if it's, if we were to say taxis and we're 10 foot deep in snow, then taxis aren't going to get through. So, we're having conversations all the time in terms of what transport arrangements may be put in place. But initially, the initial response is that people will probably walk there, depending on the weather, because 1.5 miles. Most of our rough sleepers are aware of where Mary Rose Court is, and 1.5 miles. If there was a physical disability, then that may be another issue. But again, we'd take a pragmatic decision at the time.
Sorry, that would just lead me on to a further question then. So I'm assuming though, if they are walking by foot, they're expecting them there, and if there was any issue in them not turning up and they were expected, then obviously there would be some trigger then perhaps to, I don't know, try and find where this person's gone if they're saying that they're going from A to B and they don't arrive at B.
Yeah, I mean, obviously we wouldn't have staff who were available to go out and seek where they are, so we would be notifying the police. They are part of the working party that identify the rough sleepers anyway, so we've got good liaison with them. They will know that SWEP will have been activated for that night, so we'll be aware of who's around on the streets anyway. So it's certainly another partnership with the local police.
Thank you for that, and that is reassuring to know. The only other thing that I wanted to ask was, is there any concern, obviously, I'm assuming these rough sleepers are aware of what's being put in place and the referral system. Are there any concerns, however, that just as things happen, you can never forecast what's going to happen. Is there any concern that they might turn up directly at Mary Rose Court, and how we would deal with that if they did?
I think, from what I'm told, the staff that work directly with the rough sleepers, there's enough engaging conversations with them. It would be very clear what the arrangements were, and most people know May Place and to go to May Place. I would hope it was very unlikely, but obviously the doors at Mary Rose Court would only be opened by arrangement, and that's why we've got the referral system in place. So it's not just a sort of first come, first served arrangement. There is that triage system set up.
Thank you. We have 3 councillors who've indicated that they have further questions. Bearing in mind that we should at least aim, hopefully, to finish before standing orders, and bearing in mind also the officer has stated that she will supply written answers. For Councillor James Parker and Councillor Wardridge, would it be possible to limit yourself to about 5 minutes each, and then we can move on? Are you happy with that? Lovely. So it's Councillor James.
I'll give you all my questions in one go. The first one is in relation to, and it was picked up by Stuart, in relation to the referral process. It's going to take place in May Place. so all of the people have got to turn up at 7:30 to have the referral. Then it says that they then have to go to Mary Rose Court. Well, there'll be an assessment. But in the report it says that that assessment process, they could then be turned away. My concern is there's lots of, as you've said, lots of red tape. They have a referral, and at the referral process at May Place, if you've not got a local connection, you will be turned away. It says in the protocol. If you could just talk about how that's going to work. That's my first question. The other one I'd like to raise is within the protocol under risk assessment, what you say is each night will be treated as a new SWEP night with an assessment made with regarding who in the most vulnerable and in need of the SWEP bed for the coming night. So it will not necessarily follow that the same individual will have a bed for all consecutive SWEP nights. So is it that if we have Mrs. Smith who's in there and Mr. Jones comes along and he's more vulnerable, the protocol is saying that Mrs. Smith will have to leave? Is that what you're saying? The two questions.
On the second question, because I can remember that one, no, we would not be throwing somebody out of a bed to put somebody else into a bed. It's about separate nights. Just so that we weren't having people saying, I was here last night, so I'm here again tonight. So each assessment will be done on a separate night. That's the aim of that assessment process. Because their needs may well have changed. Our intention is that we will be working with that individual the next day to find them more suitable accommodation under no second night out principles. So they may well have refused accommodation, in which case somebody who is newly rough sleeping or who has just presented and is willing to work with us the next day will get priority. Can you remind me what the first question was?
It was around the process in the protocol that talks about referral at May Place. Then when they get to Mary Rose Court, there will be an assessment process.
Yeah, the assessment will have been done at May Place. The idea is that there will be an interim period between them presenting at May Place, having their assessment and walking, however, getting to Mary Rose Court. In the interim, their circumstances may have changed. They may have met a drug dealer on the route, they may have consumed a considerable amount of alcohol en route, and so we would need to clarify that there are no additional risks that weren't initially presented at May Place. It's not a whole second assessment, it's just a sense check. Are the circumstances that were seen at May Place still the case?
Can I just clarify, because you say that there will be an assessment taking place at May, but the protocol says there will be a referral. They will take a limited referral to May Place, to Mary Rose Court, where you'll carry out an assessment, a detailed assessment.
The referral will have been triaged, in simple terms, at May Place. The decision will be made by the Mary Rose Court team. They are the people who will be working with those individuals that night. So the assessment will be sat in the background making a decision. The assessment, the decision will be made by the Mary Rose Court team, who will let May Place know that yes, we will accept the person or we won't, so that we don't have somebody who has been referred at May Place and then tracks all the way to Mary Rose Court and is told no, we can't accept you, because that is obviously a huge risk to our staff team and obviously to that individual as well. So the assessment sits in the background, as it were, but the decision will have been communicated to them at May Place.
Thank you, Councillor James. Councillor Parker.
First of all, Chair, can I just say I appreciate your making reference to the requirement to try and finish at 9:30. It disappoints me if this issue isn't important enough for those persons that we're talking about. that we can't just say, well, we'll give as much time as required to these discussions. I would have liked to have thought that would have been a sort of priority for this evening. I would like to drill down a little bit from Councillor James' question. I don't think that we've got the answer, or the answer hasn't come clearly enough in regard to exactly what happens at the time when somebody is given a voucher almost. As I see it, the rough sleeper support team go and target potential clients of this service. They then are suggesting that they go down to May Place by 7:30 for the first assessment to be carried out. Then is that information sent through to Mary Rose House by telephone or email, by fax? Well, so we now know that. So they wait for that to then get an answer back. So the staff at May Place are faced with the prospect of saying, you're a failed applicant. And is that for that evening? Is that for accommodation that night? Okay. I understand that a little bit better. I thank you for that. Chair, can I then just go on to a couple of questions that I'd have? I'll try, depends on how long the officers are in answering it, to meet your 5-minute deadline. On page 10 of 92, if I can just refer to partnerships, it's the 4th paragraph starting, members of the public may wish to report concerns. And it states in here that the Stoneham Rough Sleepers phone numbers and email address will be provided to the police and the BDBC Snow website page. Could I make an assumption the contact number for May Place will also be publicised? Could I make an assumption that that information would also be made available to the BDBC contact centre and also their emergency call out over the weekend period? Because it doesn't say that, and perhaps it's an omission.
Yes, it's an omission. That's certainly our intention. That well, it's already there. They already have those numbers and contacts.
Thank you very much. And could I then just also ask whether there is any communication of these contact details to the town centre churches? Because it's been made reference. I know firsthand the role that the communities at the town centre churches do have in regard to trying to make a referral. Could I ask, if it hasn't been, can it be done? Can those establishments be contacted and the necessary contact details sent through to their administration officers?
Yes.
You have the list already. Just to conclude then, for my question, Chair, if I may, could I just, as a point of query, just ask, I note that we have a recommendation here as a committee to note the report. Are comments from this committee not going anywhere?
I'll ask the officer to just follow that up.
Well, as I said, this is an organic document, so the comments that have been made tonight, which are very, helpful comments, will be incorporated into the protocol moving forward. We were asked to bring back a report before the winter, stating where we were with severe weather arrangements, and that's what we've done, and that's what we're asking you to note.
Thank you, Chair. Well, I would like to think that somewhere along the line there is some, because I can't think that all comments are going to enter into the protocol, but there are points that have been made by members of this committee, and I would have liked to have thought that actually there would be some form of note of those comments, because I can't see how they can all actually go into the protocol, because some of them might not actually be deemed by the professionals, by the officers, as relevant. But I find it very strange from the experience of the other committees that I sit on that we aren't actually having some sort of comment back and some reference to the points that have been made by the members. Certainly if we go into debate.
I guess because there's not a decision to be taken or a decision by a portfolio holder or by Cabinet or Council, that's why it is for members to note, and officers will take forward the comments that have been made, and where it's appropriate, and we will incorporate them into the protocol. The protocol reflects a series of working practices, and that's what this is designed to do. Comments that you've made that hadn't been anticipated, we will work with those, and that will be discussed with partners, and we will move that forward.
Sorry, Chair. Can I reel back and just say one other question I did mean to ask was of the officers. It came up from comment from another member of the committee. Has an alternative facility been considered other than Mary Rose House? Maybe possibly a temporary facility that could accommodate more people.
Well, based on the fact that 6 is deemed, as things stand at the moment, is considered to be a proportionate arrangement, Mary Rose Court was considered the most optimum service because it's accommodation based, it's located within the town, and no alternative better option in our view was available. If we're talking about a situation where a rest centre needs to be set up, that will be a different sort of dialogue. But we're talking about making emergency beds available within supported housing provision, which is what officers consider to be the most appropriate way forward.
Thank you, Councillor Parker. Councillor Wardridge, do you have further questions?
I'll limit it to one other question just to speed things up a bit for you. Just a little bit more about the reconnection policies, in particular if, say you had rough sleepers during this period, or indeed sort of in other periods who you can reconnect to other areas. Is there, going back to the budget, is there a budget there to reconnect them, to give them rail warrants or whatever, and will there be unlimited rail warrants? It's not just people in priority need, it's anybody who needs reconnected. So just that.
We have a contract provided through Supporting People, whatever their official term is now, because it's not supporting people anymore, that provides a fund specifically for reconnection. So we utilise that fund to support people back into their county or country of origin. So there is a specific fund that isn't provided within Basingstoke and Deane Borough Council, specific funds anyway. Yeah.
Just a supplementary to that, is that unlimited budget? So could that cover lots of people needing reconnecting, or?
I'd love to have a unlimited budget for anything. That'd be wonderful. No, it's obviously not unlimited, and it's obviously a rate that's been specified by the Supporting People team. I have no idea off the top of my head what that sum is, but it's not an excessive amount of money, I will say.
Just to sort of add to that, there are other pots of money that could be used to supplement that type of provision, whether it's the local welfare assistance funding or whether it's part of the sub-regional money that's also been allocated. There's also homeless prevention money. For the sorts of expenses you're talking about with reconnection, which is often the cost of a rail warrant, that wouldn't be an impediment to helping someone return to their home area.
It was just checking that it's not just people in priority need, you would do it for other people. Yeah, thank you.
Right, thank you, councillors. Thank you for all the questions. Now, the paper, of course, is for noting rather than any particular proposal. I know, Councillor Bierman, you had your hand up. and there are other hands going up. We're not, as such, recording individual comments. Obviously, we can record a committee view if there is a committee view and a consensus on that. Other than that, I think if you just want to make comments, and the other option, of course, is to ask for this to come back, if you want that to come back later on and have a review of it, if the officers are happy to bring that back. When would we be thinking of that, Kate?
My suggestion would probably be at the end of the winter, bearing in mind that, officers will be reviewing this at all levels, but I know that the January meeting is chocker. So suggest February at the earliest, possibly the March meeting, where you can get a full picture of how this is unfolded.
Is everyone happy with that it comes back in March? And we can see some shaky heads. Councillor James, did you want to comment on that then?
No, I think that lots of things have been raised tonight in relation to the report that are said but are not very different to what's in the report. And so I would welcome that you have your your conference or whatever it is next week with Homeless Link and your partners, and you take on board some of the comments from tonight, and that this comes back really, and I would welcome it coming back prior to the winter or as soon as we can. I mean, initially I put this on the agenda in January, we received it in February, and I would really like this, for us to see that we're happy with it as a committee and that we feel it's fit for purpose. And I think lots of things that we said tonight have raised our concerns. And carry on my comments, but I would like to see it come back with some. Hopefully, that you'll take on some of these concerns and the concerns of Homeless Link in relation to local connection and in relation to good practice, really.
Thank you, Councillor James. The officers were just checking when the earliest possible time is for it to come back. If you just bear with us for a second. The earliest it could come back would be February, because the January agenda is already full. So is the committee happy with that? Because that will still, I suppose, be the winter period, and we could still be having bad weather. Councillor Harvey.
Thank you, Chair. In tune with other people, I respect the committee issues in terms of agendas. What I want to see are changes. I want to see this protocol changed, and I want those changes to reflect what HomeLink have said, and I want those changes to reflect what members have said around the table, so that actually what's implemented this winter is the changed protocol. You're going to have the seminar, understand that. That will lead to changes. I don't just want to note this. I would rather have a clear steer from the committee to pick up what has been some really good contributions cross-party here to something we all support, we all want, we all agree with, and there's no disagreement, I think, around the table with anything anybody has actually said. But the protocol doesn't reflect, and nor does the report. And just as one example, at the top of page 12 of 92, the report says for any individuals not accepted, they will be given a card to meet the outreach team the next day to explore alternative options. Well, that isn't what's been said this evening in terms of process and procedure. But the report gives us a direction of travel that says people who are turned away, well, we're not going to turn people away, are we? So it's just picking up the debate we've had, which gives quality to the protocol. So if you're going to bring it back in February to review it, fine. Can I see the changes and all the other members see the changes before then?
In discussion with Kate, perhaps we could suggest that following the Homeless Link conference and the comments that have been made individually, take those on board, rework the document and issue it by email. Yeah? Yeah, this side of Christmas. Yeah? And then bring it back in February for a formal. Okay?
Can I also just say that, and it seemed as if we've really been quite attacking, but I'd like to thank the officers and the partners for what they've done. And this isn't a step. If you think that we didn't have anything in place and the concerns that we had, so thank them for the work they've done, and we look forward to the changes. Thank you.
Thank you. I think Councillor Bierman, you've been waiting to say something.
Thank you. Yeah, as it happens, the very first remark I was going to make linked with this a bit. The point being that this is already, irrespective of what's been said, a step forward. If the officers, and I'm sure it's totally sincere, are going to listen and adapt as far as possible, then we're moving further forward as well. I was out yesterday morning and greeted the first few flakes of snow in my part of the world. So we're in a position where tomorrow, or in fact if you read the Daily Express, somebody may hear, I don't, we're going to have an incredibly terrible winter. And in fact, it should have started by now, so something's gone a bit wrong there, but nonetheless, it's going to be pretty bad. So what I'm saying is we can't sort of dither on this. We've got to carry on with what we've got. And yes, certainly come back and review it at the earliest opportunity. And I think that's the practical and pragmatic way forward. That's my humble opinion on that. I'd like to come back where my opinion is perhaps not quite so humble, and that is, I'm sorry, to persist in this question of how many people will be in need. And I think it's been suggested by those who are wiser than I that it's not so much that the number of 6 isn't accurate in the way it's done. The question is whether the way it's done is right, i.e. the methodology isn't perhaps right. And I don't think we should say, irrespective of all the other things that are going to be done, right, we've hit the right number and that's it. I think we've got to, at this stage, be thinking about what other alternative or additional arrangements can be made for the extra ones, because everything that I hear from all sorts of sources are that there are many more people sleeping rough than the figures throw up. So I don't think we should rest and say, yeah, we've sorted that. The number of years I've heard to the contrary, and as I say, in these last 12 months I've heard a lot more and indeed met some of the people who are the users, which is relevant as well. In the report there's reference here to data protection, and I had a little snigger. This is under the joint working protocols. Now, it says this will include addressing areas of data protection and confidentiality. Now, I'm a person who likes to think of personal privacy and data protection, but in as much as one can go and ask President Obama what we had for supper last night under the regime that seems to be prevailing, there aren't many secrets that we have, and I wouldn't want the protocols of data protection to interfere with the useful interchange of information. I think that's where, in social services and many other things are going wrong, because people are too scared to give information that would be useful from one agency to another. So I understand the legal framework in which we're working, but I hope that that framework, in circumstances like this, not for self-interest, not for the interests of the council, but generally will be pushed out as far as one can, where it's going to be useful to interchange information between different agencies and different support groups. Because, as I say, sometimes that's where things are going wrong, because of the lack of exchange of information, and it does worry me in society generally. And then I have one last point, sorry, but I did keep quiet on the questions, and that was, yeah, I'm going to be terribly heartless now. I don't see a mega problem with people walking 1.5 miles. I expect it of myself, I expect it of members of my family, and I do know that a lot of the users are quite remarkably mobile, one way or another, and in most cases 1.5 miles isn't enough. And if every user turns up and says, I want a taxi ride, I think we're going in the wrong direction. If it's good enough for the world at large, obviously if somebody has an infirmity or other difficulty, that's different. But I don't think we should be moving too far to the direction of, hail a taxi, here's another one. It should be, the generality should be walking. I don't see a problem with 1.5 miles, and that's what, okay, if the snow's deep enough, the taxis probably won't be running anyway. So as I say, I think we should be erring on the side of working without any question, walking.
Thank you, Councillor Bierman. Councillor James, you had your hand up earlier. Have we covered your points? And also Councillor Harvey, have we covered his points as well, do you think? I'll come back. Councillor Parker, you had your hand up.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I also would like to just to say that actually I have great sympathy for the officers and the other organisations that are having to work with the resources that they're being given. I don't necessarily welcome the measures being taken. I'm relieved at the measures that are being taken, and I think as a local authority they're far too long coming, and I don't point the finger to officers in that regard, and I hope they appreciate, or any other voluntary organisation that's involved in this sphere. Just a couple of points that I mean, we note that the comments have said may not be ideal. It's to keep people alive. Back in the 1970s, I was a volunteer in the arrangements that were being put in place by the churches of the town. I do have regard to the need for risk assessment and for trained professionals in this area, but certainly at that time there weren't any, and the provision seemed to work relatively well. And my fear is that the choice of location, Mary Court, itself introduces immediately certain restrictions and limitations. And I do just wonder whether we're trying to make our provision match what's available, as opposed to maybe what is going to be required. I would have much rather that as a local authority we were being able to say we're making provision for 15, and if we found out that we only needed 8, that would be good, rather than maybe possibly my big fear being that it's going to be the other way round. And I say that because I do have some experience. I have reported rough sleepers in the past within the town centre, and on occasions they have not been known by those persons who you might expect to be aware of this. And in actual fact, I had a conversation just this afternoon with a member of our community support team with regard to how things going in this particular field, and the comment came to me was, well, do you know, it's funny actually, in the last period of cold weather they seem to have disappeared. And I hope that's not the 11th and the 12th of November when we did our assessment. Trend tends to be, maybe, whilst the weather is not so bad and the temperatures are not so cold, they stay with what they've got, which sometimes is tented bivouacking within the parks, and then once the weather gets particularly cold, they move elsewhere, and then maybe if you've turned up to find them where they were before, you're not going to find them just now when the weather gets cold. So I will leave it at that. I think it's a pity, really. We have a member of the public that's turned up who has, which appears to me to be very much first-hand knowledge with regard to dealing with the people. They are not easy people to deal with, I do understand. We are not dealing with people that might just do everything they're told to do, agree with everything you're saying, and there has to be risk assessments involved. I was a little concerned when part of the discussion was from our guests that one member of staff, I thought I'd read in the report that it actually said that at all times there would be 2 professionals at hand and not actually one. I didn't understand when we had a comment of there only being 1 member of staff.
There is one dedicated member of staff specifically working with the Rough Sleepers group. There is also another member of staff on site who is at hand to be able to be called on if required. So there will be 2 people around. One of them is providing a sleep-in service as part of our accommodation-based service. So they're there to support if there are any risks raised. So there are 2 people there, but one is specifically paid for and related to this service.
From what was in the discussion by members of the committee, it was made reference to maybe we can't rely totally on this local authority to put in place this an adequate provision. I think we can, I think we should, and I think it's only right that this local authority does. The suggestion that maybe there are alternative providers, well, my experience, if I can say, in regard to potentially the town centre churches, is it's not a possibility, because those organisations also have to have their own risk assessments with regard to their services they're providing, and excuse the pun, services with churches, and they also have to make reference to their own safeguarding policies, and it's not, I don't think it's practicable for these organisations to react in the way that was suggested.
Thank you, Councillor Parker. Thank you, committee, for very constructive comments, I think. Thank you, Kate, and thank you very much, our guests, for coming along this evening. Very much appreciate you coming here and being here this evening. Thank you. Before we make a start on paper B, I would just like to crave the committee's indulgence for a moment, just to ask Kate, are you happy to go straight into that, bearing in mind that it's your paper again, or would you like a 5-minute break to have a drink? You sure? Because I know. Yes.
Resolution.
Thank you. So before we start on paper B, Tracy's just going to sum up for us.
Okay, in terms of the committee resolution, the committee notes the step forward that's been made in terms of the provision, that the comments will be reviewed from the webcast in terms of the committee that's been held tonight. The information and comments received from the Homeless Link conference will also be reviewed, and the document will be reworked and circulated by email to the committee before the Christmas break, and a formal review of the process will come back to this committee in February.
And as a substitute member of the committee, not a standing member of the committee, can I give a copy to you as well?
Yes.
Thank you. So we now move on to paper B, which again is Kate's paper. So if you'd like to introduce.
Thank you. This paper gives you a current position statement in terms of the progress with the review of the housing allocation scheme. Members may recall that carrying out a review of the allocation scheme was another strategic priority objective of the new housing and homelessness strategy. Primarily, the catalyst for that was legislative changes introduced within the Localism Act, and with new statutory provisions for homelessness invariably comes new statutory guidance. The report also outlines those other factors that needed to that were driving towards a review of the allocations scheme. The need to sort of modernise certain elements, and the need to take into account feedback that was coming from our applicants and people on the housing register about how the scheme of allocations was working. Based on what was set out in the government's code of guidance, and there is a summary in the report of the new statutory guidance on 3.1.1 little b. The consultation was framed on that, and we've given you detail in the report about the comprehensive range of measures that were taken into account to do that consultation, which included an online survey in response to which there are over 400 responses, and I stand to be corrected on this. I think that trumps the number of individuals who responded to the local plan and the council tax system consultation. Not the number of comments, but the number of individuals actually responding. So got really good coverage thanks to the BBC. And we had quite an unprecedented amount of feedback. The results of the consultation are summarised for you in the report and in more detail in Appendix 7. And the reason why this has come back to you as a work in progress at this point in time, and why you've got proposals for change and not recommendations for change, because it is quite important to stipulate the difference there, is that we'd said that we would come back to you around this time, and we were keen to let you know how progress was going. There were a significant amount of responses, particularly free-flow responses from individuals, and we had to work through those. And obviously, deciding to effect a policy change, also then, if you're going to do that, you need to do some research about what the impact might be and what the provisions of that policy change might be in detail. And then, completely unanticipated, whilst all this work was going on, a new consultation was launched by CLG on additional local connection provisions. Hadn't anticipated that, and I think it's fair to say most housing professionals hadn't anticipated getting that code of guidance. Members may be aware that when you're reviewing your scheme of allocations, you have to have regard to statutory code of guidance, and we don't know what that guidance will be till the consultation's over and the government then publishes that new code. And we're told by the relevant civil servant that their aim is to get that out by the end of December. So once we've had that code of guidance and can take that into account and related it to the work that we've done, then we can possibly, frame some recommendations based on that. We also know that the RSLs are very keen to influence and want to have more detailed discussion with us on the detail of any proposals and final recommendations. Members may be aware that we have an LSVT, from the LSVT arrangement with Sentinel and Sovereign, an intention or an objective to have sort of convergence in policies and approaches wherever possible. So it's a piece of work that needs to be undertaken in conjunction with them. So these are proposals for change based on the work we've done so far, very much based on the outcome of the consultation and guided by the consultation responses, and they are summarised for you on 3.2 of the report, but there's also a detailed appendix which goes through sort of where we are in terms of understanding the potential impact of some of those proposals and some of the work that we would still have to do before they can reach a state of completion for recommendation for committee to consider. So having said that, we will be back and we will be back when that work is complete, the new guidance is in place. And we've got the feedback from the RSLs, and of course we'd have to do an equalities impact assessment of any proposed changes to an allocations policy. I believe the earliest we would be able to do that, bearing in mind when the code of guidance would be February at the earliest. So to that end, we're asking you to note the progress that we have at the moment, but the portfolio holder is here. It's very much a listening report in terms of being able to hear the comments that you've got. And officers will take away those comments and we'll build those into the work as this progresses. Thank you.
Thank you, Kate. So before we move on to Councillor Tilbury, so if I can just clarify with you, Kate, we are noting individual comments tonight and taking them away. They're not going to be minuted, as is the custom, but they will be taken away by the officers and fed back into the consultation, as this is a work in progress and it forms part of the consultation, and then the paper will come back again in the spring. Is everybody happy with that? I can see Councillor Jane.
So how do we get our individual comments or comments as a whole, as a committee, recorded? I'm a bit in the process.
Individual comments can be taken as we go through by the officers. We will also review the webcast to make sure we pick them all up. If there's a view of the committee, that can be recorded as a resolution in addition to the individual comments. What we can't do is put the individual comments in the minutes.
Unless the committee decides it's happy with that, so that officers can record it. You're asking for individual comments and the committee is happy with that, you can capture them. It's nothing to hurt that at all. Saves you having to do it again on the webcast.
I understand what you're saying, but in terms of the protocol for minuting these meetings, it is view of the committee. We will take the individual comments off of the webcast or capture as many as we can in officer form. Okay?
Thank you very much. Councillor Tilbury.
Thank you, Chair Committee. Yeah, I mean, the first point I'd make, there doesn't seem to be much reference to the sort of local connection for villages, which have their own local connection. Oops. I mean, one of the issues that's come up over many years that I'm aware of is a sort of, someone moves into private rent accommodation, say someone like Overton, and after 6 months, they're as local as someone who's lived there all their life, and very often if they're then evicted, they're then at the top of the housing list then because of their circumstances, which seems very unfair, and it's one of those things that causes a lot of resentment. There's a comment on the staff comments there about sort of taking people off the list if they're not actually bidding. Well, if you look at the page afterwards, I think that it sort of highlights two of the issues there. There's people saying, well, I only have 10 points, there's no point in bidding, it's a waiting game, and someone else saying I bid all the time. And I think the danger is there that you'll encourage people to bid all the time and make yourself even more work. Because I think the reality is, I think a lot of people are aware of the issues around that and think, well, there is no point in bidding at this point in time. Well, I'll wait till I get some more points. But occasionally people doing the lower bands do get houses. So, and I think that brings on to the, I think we discussed this earlier, Kate, as we were walking in. If you look at some of the comments in there, from I suspect, well, I hope they're from members of the public, not from councillors, but, I mean... there is a lot of misinformation out there around social housing, and I think people don't understand that, and it isn't helped by, if you read the Daily Mail, which is enough to make anyone scream. But I mean, there's one comment here: social housing was intended to assist the most vulnerable in society. I feel that this message was lost during the time when availability of social housing was in relatively good supply. Without the last time that was the case was probably the 1970s, where at that point in Overton there were 600 houses, or there were 1,200 houses, and 600 of them belonged to the council. They saying half the people in there were vulnerable, and the numbers were probably about the same in Basingstoke because of the large amount of housing that was built for London overspill. And there's the one on the other one, again, which just shows up these things. If they are working, why do they need social housing? Surely they can pay their own rent. Well, I think we all know the answer to that, but the trouble is that's their perception. They honestly believe that, people. That's why they make these comments. They're not stupid, but I think the problem is we need to get the messages around this out there, because a lot of people don't understand that. Particularly I find with older people who did have a mortgage a long time ago when houses were much cheaper, or even lived in a council house when the rents were far lower. They really don't realise how expensive it is to live these days. And I think we need to get that message out there. But I think the other thing is the ones on the list, and I've had this discussion time and again with the officers. The people on the list need to understand the bidding process, and they need to understand that they need to bid, and a lot do, and a lot are doing it all the time, but others really just don't understand that. And I think that's a constant thing we've got to keep reinforcing, because there's new people coming in all the time, and we can put something in the paper or whatever, but 6 months down the line they may have come from another area where they do things differently, so that's all the comments I'd make on it at the moment. It's in 2 minutes, so I'll overrun anyway. Thanks very much. Thanks for your...
It might be useful to clarify. I think, what we wanted to do in presenting the outcome of the consultation was try to give you a flavour of what we had, and certainly the comments from the staff workshop. Staff workshops are always a really important sort of addition to the consultation. There would be endemic problems with removing people for not bidding, and currently that's not a proposal, but it just captured some of the views of staff who, people are on the list and aren't bidding and may not appear to be actively sort of seeking housing, but sure.
Thank you very much. So any questions from members? Questions? Councillor James?
You talk about the changes in the legislation. It came in force in 2013 in relation to DCLG. The one regarding residency, and it's about the minimum being 2 years. In the consultation, you had, one of the questions was 3, 5 and 7, or but prior to you developing that consultation, you came to us as a workshop as members, and I think the overwhelming view of all people across different parties was that it should be a year, but that wasn't reflected in the consultation, and I just wonder why that wasn't. And you spoke to us prior to developing the consultation. That's my first question.
Yeah, I mean, we structured it for 3 years because of the link to 3 years out of 5 within the current local connection sort of statutory definition of local connection. But we did ask people whether it should be more or whether it should be less. So in the survey responses, where you see the length of time of the 37% who said 3 years or less, 30% of those said 3 years, and it was the 7% that said less. We did go through those individual comments specifically to pick up on that. To be fair as well, I think that the 3 years was suggested, or 3 years or less, before the statutory guidance had come out. And had we known that that's what the statutory guidance was proposing, because it's still a proposal at the moment, it's not statutory guidance, there's every likelihood that we would have said 2 years within the consultation. But the consultation did say 3, and that was the results that we got back on the back of that question.
Thank you. But my question is, we had a workshop as members, and we was asked to help to form the consultation. And it was felt that we should be asked, we all felt that, or there was a view across, and that was across party, that a year in relation to lots of issues, and it was talking about economic issues and about people in schools, and they gave a good reason for why they thought a year would be an issue. But you asked for 3, and my concern is, as members, we were asked to help shape the consultation, and some of the consultation doesn't reflect what you asked us. Now, why did you say 3 when the members had said 1?
My recollection of the workshop is that it was very difficult to get any unanimous view from members on a lot of things, but the consultation question was 3 years or less. And, you know, that's how the consultation went out, and that was the response that came back. And in fact, the majority of respondents to that consultation, if you look at it in total, were actually saying 3 years or more. In fact, some were saying over 7 years.
Can I ask, in relation to the consultation on page 6 of 9, is it any possible, because you had a really good response, and at the bottom it talks about, or somewhere I've seen a number in relation to who responded on the internet, but can you break down those percentages in relation to numbers? So we were told who responded. So on page on 3.2.3, you say which groups. So there's the focus group, face to face. Is it possible to reflect that in relation? So how many people had a view from the focus group in relation to? Is it able to give us a flavour of the results of the consultation in relation to those different areas? So was the focus group predominantly, what was their view? You know, so can we understand where those consultation findings came from?
The notes of if you look at Appendix 7, that details the main findings of the focus group session and the different methods. The actual results that you've got broken down on page 6 relate to the breakdown of the online survey. Don't quote me on this. I think from memory that the numbers of individuals was about 400, with the small number of agencies, and I've got the list of agencies, people who responded on behalf of organisations. It was, I don't think it was double figures. So because we had the focus group, the majority of responses, around 400 of the responses, were from individual members of the public. And I can, if you want, I'm quite happy to forward the details in a written response of the organisations that responded to the survey.
Quite like so page 6 is the 408 who responded online. What was the stakeholder workshop, and what were did their response differ to that of?
If you look at Appendix 7 and Section 2, so that, I don't know what page of your report that would be, stakeholder workshop. And then it's broken down later in that key findings from the face-to-face work, the stakeholder workshop and staff focus group, which sort of basically breaks down what the primary findings were in terms of restricting the housing register to those in need, moving to a simpler assessment of need. I mean, there were some differences in opinions at the workshop depending on which agency was represented. There may have been some agencies that had particularly strong views around, for example, penalising bad behaviour, whereas others may not have. But on the whole, what we tried to capture was where there was strong sort of commonality in some of the conclusions being drawn.
I think it also would have been useful to, if people didn't have a view, particularly in relation to stakeholders, I'd like to have a clearer understanding in relation to those as to what their responses were, and if that's possible to see their responses and what their feeling was. So in relation to if it was probation or the police, did they have a view in relation to of housing people who had difficulties or problems? And so it's just having so we get a feeling for who said what. I think it would be important if you could do that. Can I ask?
Broken down, because as I say, there was only about 8 different organisations that responded to the survey. Not sure whether the police were included that actually sent a response.
On page 7 and 9, the proposed changes, can I ask, in relation to B and I, because those questions, did they actually go out for consultation? Because I don't remember them being in the consultation. Sorry, A and I. Sorry, not
A, no, because we felt that was too technical an issue to take out to public. A definition of how you measure overcrowding. That hasn't come through the consultation. That's come about through the need, one of the drivers for change, which was about modernising the allocation scheme from when it was last agreed in 2007. What was the quota for transfers? That came about very late on in the discussions with RSLs in terms of trying to make sure it's a huge priority to make sure that there's enough fluidity within the social housing stock to keep transfers moving, and that if you move into a simpler system, transfers may sort of be disadvantaged against general needs applicants. So if you like, that's almost a safety net that was added to the proposals quite late on to try to maintain the status quo that we have at the moment, where about 30% of allocations go to transfers. That's the current rate. So it's a safeguard provision, because if we don't have it, then we could find ourselves in a difficult position. But if you look where that proposal relates to in the appendix, we haven't worked through the detail of that yet with our, what properties, how will they be decided, who takes that decision about what goes to a transfer. But it's just recognising at this stage that we need to make sure that there's enough priority for transfers. You may think that actually it should be higher than 30% or whatever. So, what we wanted to do is certainly not to disadvantage the prospects for people looking to transfer.
And just going back on that, and on A then, did you ask the stakeholders about that in relation to their workshop?
No.
And on, in relation to those proposals for change, in relation to H, we didn't consider family association because there's new guidance, so that doesn't include.
No, that's correct. The proposals, as I said, that this is a work in progress, and we supplemented what had gone out in the consultation when we took a look at the guidance. We did get a lot of comments back, actually. I think I mentioned that in the report, that a lot of people felt from the consultation that to exclude or not to have any facility for considering family connections would be too restrictive, and indeed that then came out in the statutory guidance. So I think that just demonstrates how we're moving this piece of work through.
Thank you, Councillor James. Councillor Bierman.
Thank you. Can I just start by congratulating you on your response rate? Perhaps you could talk with the forward planning team and tell them how to frame questionnaires so that people feel inclined to respond. But that's just a little aside. Yeah, can you start by, since it seems to be gathering, and I found the responses very fascinating and interesting and informative, but can you start by explaining, since it seems to be having some statutory bite, what a hard-working family is? It's used as one of the criteria for being, and you know that. Right. Okay. Well, you're floundering, as am I, on that one. That's I don't blame you. That's not a criticism that you're floundering on that. We'll have to get somebody else to explain it. Right. Next one was sort of, in my enthusiasm, turned over the page too enthusiastically, and now I can't remember what the question was. But I'm there, almost there. Sorry, forgive me. Right. Yes. This question of applicants with bad behaviour. Now, that is clearly an issue, and it's clearly something that other tenants have strong feelings about. The question is, if you're a time-served bad behaviourist, at what time, you know, if you've been in prison, well, you serve your time and you know when your bad behaviour is deemed to have been over and your time spent. How do you judge when somebody, is it by sort of an interview, or how do you decide when the behaviour, be it antisocial behaviour, be it bad debts, be it whatever, has sort of, it's time for people to have another chance?
We haven't bottomed that detail out yet. I think what I've tried to make clear in the report that is that is a piece of work in progress in terms of teasing out what other allocations policies are saying, speaking to other local authorities, speaking to other housing providers, to actually see what works well. Because there's things that if you don't include them, you get 6 months into a policy and you sort of trip over, you know. Does that bad behaviour have to have happened in the locality or in the area? Or, as you say, how do you tone for bad behaviour? All we've got at the moment is a very strong direction from the consultation and from a number of stakeholders that behaviour or bad behaviour is something that should be penalised within an allocation context. So in many respects, housing need is not unfettered by previous behaviour, and that is something that housing providers wanted to look at as well. It's a difficult one to grapple with, and it's very easy to say we haven't worked out the detail yet, but we are working on that.
I've not finished, but about to Councillor James first.
Purely, you said that housing providers would want you to introduce that. Would it be that it would make their lives and a lot easier as a housing provider if they had known people that with any behavioural difficulties or any problems? Would that possibly be a reason why they might not want to house these people, and that's why they've actually asked you to include that?
I don't know what was behind all respondents' motivations. What I do know is that the response from the public was quite significant. But you know, I don't know what motivates housing providers necessarily. But you know, if most of them have it written into their own exclusion policies anyway. So the fact that this would be within our own policy would reflect what many housing providers are doing. It's just a case of what is actually bad behaviour. Is it something that occurred within a previous tenancy, or is it something that occurred irrespective of a tenancy? And that's what we really need to bottom out.
I mean, certainly I think the views of other tenants and the impact on them is very important, irrespective of what the providers think. My final thing was just probably a little foible of my own, but whilst I'm quite interested in the topic of, well, no, put it this way, almost said something I shouldn't have done. Where we're looking at bedroom allocations and for children in the household makeup, we refer to sex, and I think we should be saying gender. I think referring to it to sex brings, even if you're writing in an email and were to put some of these things in the title of the email might be blocked. And gender is the proper term, to my mind, and I think we should use it unless you say, well, half the users won't understand won't understand what gender is. But I think where we can, we should use the word gender. All right, if there's no reason why not, then I'd like it.
Thank you. Councillor Parker.
Thank you, Chair. I wanted just to seek some clarification as to where we are with regard to service families. I appreciate there's a generalised reference to the government guidance, because there are operational issues as far as I can see. The general sort of support for service families is certainly something that I would support, but what's the practicalities? Have we got any sort of suggestions in regard to is this going to be service families that have local connections, or is this service families who have been stationed within the locality of the borough, accommodation within the borough, which is currently, I know the experience. Some service personnel stationed close to Basingstoke may well be in accommodation provided for them within the borough of Basingstoke. Could we have some?
I'm quite happy to send you the detail of the guidance on service personnel, but essentially the government made it very clear, and that's reflected in statutory provision as well, excuse me, that ex-service personnel should not be disadvantaged in terms of any local connection provisions, in terms of being able to apply to join a housing register, and that would be the intention of framing this allocation policy or any connection protocol for this policy. At the moment, it is an open register and anyone can apply. I would anticipate that would remain the case in order to be statutorily compliant thereafter. There are additional provisions within statute that where service personnel have urgent housing needs, they should be prioritised. We have a working definition of urgent housing needs. We've had that in the policy since 2007, and ex-service personnel, as with any other applicant, would not be disadvantaged from being considered under that criteria. What you have seen may have picked up referenced ad hoc in there is where we're looking at things like income bars or income qualifications that, again, no ex-service personnel. When I say ex-service, there's a very specific definition of ex-service personnel and their families, which I'm happy to send to you, that certain things wouldn't be taken into account in terms of considering sort of income and savings, and that's referenced where it's appropriate to within the appendix.
Thank you, Chair. Is that page 4 of the code, or is that several pages?
No, I'll separate it.
Oh, okay. Thank you very much. I would appreciate that. Chair, can I just go on a couple more? In regard to the question of applicants with significant savings, was there any consideration or deliberations given to age bracketing here in regard to maybe persons that are closer to or well within retirement?
No, but you may wish to suggest that something that might be appropriate.
So it's not for me to interfere, but it does allow for people who might need to go into sheltered housing and so on, being able to have 30,000 without that necessarily disqualifying them. And to my mind, that's addressing that issue. There were a couple of other similar things, I thought. Yeah, well, so.
Thank you. Well, I don't know if this is the forum, really. It's reading the paper. And from the previous consultation and workshop that we did, sometimes that age in life, the people are starting and choosing maybe to do things that they hadn't done during this, if I can use that word, hard working period. And I think to some extent this is a penalty. It's a well, my own note here was 60 plus. Well, we have 55 plus forums, and we have those now getting. I think they're going to be 60 plus forums, and I don't particularly want to pick a age from off the tree, but I have a view that from experience with elderly residents in social housing, sometimes they can choose to commute, part of the pension benefit. Now I know it says pensions, but I don't know that actually whether it makes reference to a commutable pension benefit, and they might choose to do that in regard to a choice they have, and with them being limited to the amount of capital they can have at a significant time may impact on their housing choice. I would think there needs to be a little bit more thought given to it. I see somebody creeping up to the top end of the table.
To say, I think it's a very good point that we haven't thought about, and we will think about it. If others want to say things about it tonight, I'm happy to listen to it, but I just want to give an undertaking that we had not thought about whether the 30,000 should in any way be age-related, and we will think about whether it should in any... I mean, we just don't think about whether it should be 30,000, whether it should come in at all. But if it comes in, whatever figure it is, we will consider whether it should be age-related, because I think you've raised a valid point.
Just before the cabinet member goes away. I know I wouldn't catch you. Just on that point, it's just the definition of exceptional circumstances and also the definition of savings in that context. Really would appreciate through the portfolio, if you're having that discussion, yes, but it's understanding what you mean by that in a much better detail. Savings is such a huge word, as so is exceptional circumstances.
I hope there would be more, if we come back with recommendations in February, I think you said, there would be government guidance permitting, there will be more flesh on, there will be more detail at that point. Yes.
Sorry, just trying to emphasise that this is a work in progress, and it may well be that actually, prior to coming to a committee, another workshop is appropriate as the best way of sort of moving this forward or capturing where we are, rather than sort of moving this through the formal committee proceedings without having another sounding board, if you see. Well, we had other issues that needed to be picked up at that workshop, so we could have one specifically dedicated.
Perhaps while I could just also comment on the bad behaviour. I mean, when I've met with the RSLs, I've always said we're talking about persistent or serious or some other adjective on bad behaviour, not just... But if someone has been particularly forms of antisocial behaviour, particularly like racially aggravated antisocial behaviour or something, or if they had persistently failed to pay their rent over a very long period, we would want to consider that they should go to the bottom of the list. But I'm just not, we are not talking about considering something in just for the annoying, just because they're annoying won't matter, or not appropriate. We are talking about persistent or serious bad behaviour, and again, we've got to work and if we can't come up with suitable detail, we'll drop the idea altogether. So, but, if you can't define it, but I just think that, there are some people, it would give the RSLs and other people just a little extra thing to emphasise to people that if you carry on with this behaviour, if you ever need housing again, you will have to wait 6 months or whatever before you get on the register. Well, I think that's what we've been talking about. We're not talking about huge sanctions, but as I say, we are not talking about just generic bad behaviour, but really serious. I'll hang on.
Can I just pick up in terms of, what the definitions of savings, etc., and working aid, what we will try to do, or we will have to do, is to be consistent with other means-tested type definitions where appropriate. We've already mentioned the overcrowding line into the housing benefit, so it makes sense not to try and reinvent the wheel, and to use things that people understand in other sort of welfare contexts. And I'm not saying I have the answer to those tonight, but that's where we will guide our thinking.
Thank you. Councillor Golding, if you just stay put for 1 second. Councillor James and Councillor Harvey had their hands up, but Councillor Parkles hasn't finished. So are these very closely related with... Go ahead.
It was just picking up on that issue of bad behaviour. So housing associations have procedures, and if someone is a persistent offender, they can take action in relation to the courts. But if we then say they are evicted, and then they're not going to be housed because they're not allowed to go onto our register, or where are they going to live? And then what happens? I mean, are we saying that they are going to go into the private sector? These people. I just would like to have much clearer understanding, really, as to what you mean by bad behaviour, who's going to assess it, and understand it a bit more clearly.
Especially matter cases.
If we make a change of this sort, it will have a clear definition that will be that I would think would not involve a lot of interpretation. From my point, I would want to see something objective as possible. In terms of what would happen about housing them, again, we are still thinking about that. But at the moment, if people were evicted by their housing association and went on our register, they wouldn't be housed immediately. They would go on the register and have to wait. All we're saying is they might have to wait a bit longer than they would otherwise have to wait. Now, that's all we're thinking about. But as I say, if we can't come up with something workable, we'll drop the idea, as far as I'm concerned.
Okay, thank you. Could we return to Councillor Parker, because you hadn't finished, had you, Councillor Parker?
No, I hadn't, Chair, and it was this very point that was my last spot to talk about, and that was the issue of bad behaviour. That's all right. Yeah, I'm on mic. Okay, you can hear me. And this is such a very difficult one. But first of all, the point I'd like to make is that the social housing landlords that I have to work with within our ward do address this with the considerable, I would say, deliberation in the processes they have in regard to the tenancy contract, short-term tenancy contracts, reviewable, and so forth. I think what has to also be maybe recognised and maybe understood in the discussions is that a respondent to a survey that hasn't experienced first-hand antisocial, bad behavioural, continual, upsetting actions by a neighbour will have a different answer to give with regard to what leniency or consideration should be given to that family. Equally, if you then go to the other end of the spectrum, we have to consider that there are often children involved, and we do have a considerable responsibility of care for the family. And it does very much also change when you're talking about the type of accommodation, in sense of the degree of impact that bad behaviour can have on the neighbours or on the community. If you're talking about semi-detached houses or a row of terraced houses, it's a different situation to maybe flats, because a bad behaving family, antisocial, continual antisocial behaving within a block of flats can be a nightmare, and you need to talk to some of the families that have to live with that, and that does to some extent colour and influence people's approaches. And so it's a question of balance, and if, as the portfolio holder, is really the point he's making, and I think it's the relevant point, is that what we're talking about, I believe this is what we're talking about in the sense of our protocols, is that we're saying, well, look, don't expect to get quite the same treatment as somebody who has maybe we can turn and point to saying that not necessarily we're talking about bad behaviour being penalised, but perhaps good behaviour being incentivised.
Thank you. Councillor Wardridge.
Thank you. I've got a few questions. Some of them have been answered already. Did you put on there defined financial hardship? I know you had define exceptional circumstances, but just to add that one, because that's not been defined in here yet, but I presume it's one that's going to be beefed up along with what Councillor Golding said. My first question, page 54 of 92, is to do with employment. Hang on a minute, let me find it. Yeah, applicants who have a strong connection through employment in the borough, such as have employment of a permanent contractual nature. I just have concerns, given this government's introduction of zero contracts, which seems to be the norm, that if we're only having permanent contracts, there are a lot of people out there who are on 0 hours contracts who may be in that role for a long time, but they might not have a permanent contract. So just that's the first point I'd like to make. So maybe that needs working on a little bit. So it says, sorry, is it questions at the moment? Well, I suppose.
Oh, sorry, I went into...
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Oh, I followed you.
Okay, well, can you maybe put that as a comment? I'm sorry about that, Rob, because I don't want to repeat it later on. I will try and get a question now. Yeah, page 56 out of 92. Yeah, those cases whose needs are deemed more critical stroke urgent, because bearing in mind these are the people going in band 1, and they're not going to be very many of them, but everybody else is going to be in this band 2, and then it's all going to be done on date order. Have you got an idea in your heads as to how this is going to be defined? Because I think this is pivotal to this whole policy, because I have real concerns, as I think came out in the workshop, when there's, at the moment there's all these cumulative, needs that, are accounted for in the current allocations policy. Like you can get, points for welfare, for mental health, for social, for overcrowding, for being homeless. That's just 5 off the top of my head. If we're now saying that if you have 5 of those, you're in the same band as somebody who's got 1 of them, or are we really going to be housing those people who are in need? And that I have real concerns about that. So, for me, this all hinges on what we mean as critical or urgent. So maybe your thoughts on that, because you must have already beefed that up to a certain extent.
Well, we've already got a working definition which has been in the policy since 2007 of what critical and urgent is. The suggestion is to merge all the other bands that fall outside of the critical and urgent. And yes, that... No, it's in the policy, which is I can forward in a written letter. But I've also said that I think I outlined that includes some management transfers. That's the working definition that's been in place since 2007. For all those other reasonable preference needs, the suggestion or the proposal is at this stage that you have a simplified banding system. Yes. And I have to say that's based on what applicants have been telling us persistently since 2009 and what came out very strongly. And it is something that is quite difficult to wrestle with when you've been working in housing needs for a long time, but that is persistently what is coming back, that people don't understand it, it's complex, they want a simplified system, and that apart from dealing with those critical cases, they prefer a date order system or a very simplified system. At the moment, we have a 5-banded system. Nobody from band 5 ever gets housed. Very few people in band 4 ever get housed, unless it's even in the minority now, bed sits. Most bed sits are going to band 3. So it just tends to be either adaptive properties or older persons accommodation. So I would suggest that already you're working with a 3-band system, bands 1, 2 and 3 for getting housed. And that system is one that applicants don't like. So you're going from a 3-banding system to a 2-banding system. A more simplified, how do you get simpler than 3? 2 or 1, I guess.
To that. And do you really think it's going to result in those who need the accommodation at that time getting housed at that time, or is it going to be based on date order? Because that's essentially what's going to happen, isn't it?
Everyone who needs housing will never get housed. This is about how we prioritise. This is how we prioritise the legislation moved away from cumulative priority. The legislation changed after we introduced our last point system, so cumulative priority went then. Our system is extremely complex and intricate. It's less intricate than it was previously. Applicants are telling us, they're telling us in the post bag, they're telling you through casework, it's too complex, they don't understand, and what may appear as a mental health need or a social need or other types of need, it's perceived as being unfair. And I think the legislation, it's not for me to say what's right or what's wrong, it's just reflecting what the statutory framework is now, and where we are, which is probably effectively 3 bands now, suggesting a simpler system which goes to 2 bands.
If you look at the own consultation, the very first question was a housing register, a housing register only for those in housing need. And I think a lot of people, the 76% of our respondents who said yes, we're actually thinking of those cases, those community preference, with a lot of need, people with medical, with social, rather than just, one of those needs. They were thinking of the real people who really need it. And I know we're sort of tied against it with the framework that's coming through, but I just have real concerns about it. So anyway, that's my next. Right, what shall I move on to? When you did the consultation, I know it was pleased to see that you put something into all letters that went to housing benefit applicants, which was great. Did you write to everybody on the housing register as it stood, so every single person?
We wrote to everybody on the housing register who hadn't bidded, because we had flags on the CBL system. So either people would have come through and would have logged on, and those who hadn't logged on or bid, we separated those, and we wrote to all of those and invited them to telephone us up. And we took the, we went through the responses. Our contact centre went through the responses for those that wanted to do that piece of work in that way.
Or supplementary to that, but not to everybody who do bid regularly, because that might have hit a different group potentially. If those that don't bid are they going to be the ones who aren't happy with the current system, but those that do bid or are close to the top of the list, they may be more happy with the current system, if you see what I'm saying.
I don't know. In terms of coverage, we wrote to people who don't log on to the system. Those who do log on to the system would have known that there was a survey as a result of bidding on the way it took you through the CBL process. It would have been a flag on there that there is a survey. Every web message that received the standard response went, and if you had a letter from any member of the housing team during that period, it would or an email, it would also have had reference to the survey. I think the issue was, how do we maximise coverage, and certainly tying up with housing benefit colleagues to go out on housing benefit notification. And I think the success speaks for itself in terms of the number of responses that we got. It's just whether or not you agree with or like the responses.
How many do bid by phone as opposed to by web then? Most do bid by web, do they? Yeah.
I'm not sure. I could tell you. I could follow that up and let you. We had some.
I've got one more fairly complex question. Do you want me to go through it now, or do you want me to wait my turn again? Okay. Going back to the transfer, 30% transfer, I absolutely understand your arguments. We need a high proportion of transfer to maximise stock, best use of stock, etc. My only concern, and you might be able to allay it just right now, is this 30% of new stock that's going to come up for transfer applicants. Will they retain their rights of an assured tenancy, or are they going to go on to one of these fixed-term tenancies? And will it be at the same social rent that they've got now, or will it be at this affordable stuff? Okay. Because if not, it might be nice to have a quota or that sort of thing within this thing.
I think it very much depends on how that pans out. But the assumption will be transfers will only bid for properties if they're happy with the terms on which they're being advertised. So whether it is an affordable rent, whether, not all landlords are offering fixed term tenancies, some are, not all are converting. So at the moment we haven't started working through that discussion, and whether that will incorporate affordable rent, social rent, or whether it will incorporate different property types. But it wouldn't be about guaranteeing the successful applicant the same transferred rights. It would be around, how that quota will work out in practice. My understanding anecdotally is that affordable rents have been bid for by transfers in the same way as social rent. There's been no impact on bidding practices or with fixed term tenancies either.
Thank you. Councillor Peach.
Thank you. I'm going to stray between questions and probably comments, to be honest with you. It seems to be the flavour. What I wanted to say was picking up on the banding system. It struck me that band 1 being urgent and then band 2 all other, I felt it would be along the lines of more like band 1 critical, band 2 urgent, and band 3 would be others, such as low-income families, for example, someone that's perhaps only earning 25,000 a year. Could they access different things? Would that be suitable for them? In terms of, I think also quite generous as well around the bad behaviour. I'll move on to that, because a lot of authorities I've been working with, they actually exclude them completely, and what you're suggesting is sort of demoting them slightly down the priority list. And if you had band 3 people that perhaps were low-income families, is it right to wrap them up with antisocial behaviour, people that have been perhaps evicted? Just food for thought, and I'm just sort of answering some of the comments that have gone through. Also on the bad behaviour, and how do you determine if somebody's bad behaviour is severe enough that they shouldn't be either rehoused or they should be demoted in some sense? And the other aspect that's come up in practice, as they have authorities, where they have a situation perhaps where mum and dad want to transfer, but the children are causing the antisocial behaviour. Should they be penalised for the kids' behaviour that are out of control? So it's a very difficult one to gauge. No, but some of the key trigger points, if you like, so far I've seen has been perhaps a family where someone in the household has been convicted and currently carries an ASBO, and other things is where someone has been evicted for antisocial behaviour. I think personally it's a difficult one where somebody is vulnerable. Do they get picked up through a different mechanism on the housing waiting list? But should they be rehoused entirely? Because if the landlord has spent perhaps many years fighting the case in order to resolve peace in the community, and then they finally get rehoused again a few years down the line, can be immensely frustrating for the communities that have been affected by it. I'm not giving you an indication of which way to go with it. I'm just indicating that, currently, compared to others, it appears to be a relatively flexible and generous proposal in the banding system. I can't remember which page it was. I think it was 42 of 92, which was around what was that one around? Was it income threshold? Yeah, income threshold. It suggested we've put 60,000 in. For me, that seems really high for a housing register where people are in need. And I think some of the London authorities have even had their upper limit at 50,000, and that's a much higher cost area. So I just wondered, because the consultation seemed to suggest 40,000 was more the figure.
It did suggest that it was quite a leaning towards that, although when you look at the actual numbers, the 14% of 400, to say that was an absolute definitive compared to some of the 90-odd% that you had in relation to some of the other questions. Given the complexities around just working out income just to get onto a housing register, I think we've erred on the side of ease, if you like, in terms of 60,000 has a natural home in terms of pay to stay and access to low-cost home ownership, and anything above that could wield out people or could exclude people who genuinely, because of other commitments or other family commitments, you know, would have very few options if that was applied. So we have been, I think, with something like income, it's not a bad thing to err on the side of sort of flexibility in terms of having quite a high limit, and certainly that was the feedback that came from housing associations that would necessarily, you know, work with tenants that maybe have, you know, they may have an income in excess of 40,000 a year, but they may have large families and they may have other second families that they're supporting. So we didn't want to make an industry out of assessing income simply to get on the register in the first place, but to have an income bar where currently we have none at the moment. 60,000 in that context seemed quite logical. I forget how many that 14% actually married out to, but it wasn't overwhelmingly significant difference between the two.
And also the reason I picked up on that is I think, again, I can't remember where my paper got destroyed by my little baby, so I'm sort of working on a blank copy and trying to remember some of the bits. But the again on that income point, I think in the report it was focusing on that this would be the threshold as well for people to buy into sort of home ownership. And I'm not sure that home ownership is great, and I know everybody perhaps aspires to it, but should that be the determining? I mean, could someone find housing in the private rent sector, or does it have to be home ownership?
I mean, I think if you're worried about people being housed who could otherwise afford an alternative, on an additional layer to this is the charitable status that's operated by RSL. So that would also weed out, say, someone who was on a single person on 59,995. I would fully anticipate the charitable status assessment weeding out applicants. But from the data we have on our housing register, we're not talking about many applicants that would be anywhere near that level of income. And I think, in fact, that was where we indicated that currently, although we don't verify income at the moment, there are no applicants with incomes around the 60,000 mark on our housing register.
Yeah, you're right. I think that came out of the Shamar, actually. I think it demonstrated the low income of people and their ability to afford housing, which from my point of view is why I'm thinking if someone earns 60,000, personally, I think they'd be able to afford something elsewhere. I mean, I don't earn 60,000 a year, and that's our household income. The other one about savings. If you're allowed to earn 60,000 a year per household, and then you have 30,000, but obviously 30,000 savings perhaps could be a resource that one day will expire. Whereas if you're earning, potentially you've got the rest of your life earning 60,000. Is 30, I know you mentioned and touched on that earlier, but I'm not convinced whether having £30,000 savings in the bank is... Well, indeed. I mean, maybe you said it earlier, the simplified route might be to reflect housing benefit rules. 10 or 16, isn't it? I don't know if it's changed recently. Well, but it's the tough one, isn't it? But what I'm saying is to put 30,000 on a savings cap, and at the same token, someone can earn 60,000 every year. Well, it could be done. Or you could be a young couple that have no money and, for whatever reason, just inherited 30,000. Does it mean you're in any less housing need because you've got? Yeah. Right.
Thank you. Councillor Harvey.
Thank you, Chair. I'll also have a go at trying to combine and save you time for the next paper. First question, Kate, really relates to the little b. It's just the way the sentence is worded. Exclude applicants who have no housing need. Then, by reference to the statutory reasonable... Forgive me, the proposals for change, a little b. Sorry, Stuart. Exclude applicants who have no housing need, brackets, by reference to the statutory reasonable preference categories. You don't actually mean no housing need, do you? Because there will be large numbers of people, or I imagine, who do have a need, but it isn't reflected in the statutory reasonable preference categories. That's the just the choice of the words and understanding that. So a simple application of that in my head could lead to vulnerable residents nonetheless not making it on because they're judged, or the process judges, that they don't tick the statutory reasonable preference. They may still have a housing need.
I'm not sure that's a question I can answer. I mean, that there is a statutory definition that's been in place since 1996. There is a code of guidance that supports that. So those definitions of housing need, and a need is different to a want or a desire, is specifically related to a housing context. These are working definitions that have been in place, and the suggestion is, yes, that we go with the working definitions, and for not ease of administration, but in terms of where that reflects our current policy and the housing need definitions, we simply transpose those over, because we're not going to be suggesting that we go through and reassess everyone according to a whole new set of criteria.
Okay, so I'd like a comment captured of a sense of concern I have. Bring it back to the workshop, bring it back in the future in the way it is, but does this concept of no housing need set against that? Because while that might be the minimum in terms of guidance and definitions, I'm not happy with that, and I'd like that to be looked at to go beyond that if that is in certain circumstances. In terms of the way the death of savings and the financial aspect that others have raised, one of the key issues in casework that's starting to come through is people whose incomes might be low or incomes might be reasonable, but their issue is credit. Their issue is actually accessing the housing in the first place. And that creates a tremendous amount of issue, I think, in the private rented sector that we've seen, but also in other sectors as well. The financial aspect is one thing, but capturing this credit issue and the issue of people who may well have an income, but they just physically, because they have either the CCJ, they have something set against them that means they cannot use the fact that they might just be over the threshold to actually access housing, is an issue in a town like ours, set against the evidence we have on the Shmar and the evidence we have in other aspects as well.
I think the point I made, though, is that if you're going with a 60,000 income threshold, we're not aware of any applicants on our housing register that are there. Just to bring you back to the definition of housing need, it may be worth having a look at the code of guidance, because it is, there's a broad range of factors, and if you have specific cases that you think are on our register at the moment with no points or only local connection points that should have a housing need reflected, because most of the deliberations with applicants occurs when they have maybe one or two housing needs and they think they have 3 or 4 in our current cumulative system. I don't believe there are many applicants, particularly if you incorporate what we're suggesting should also be a reasonable preference, which would be people suffering in the private rented sector and the tenants looking to transfer down. I'd be interested to know what sort of household you think wouldn't be included within the housing need definition. What I would suggest is that I send you the relevant guidance from the Code of Guidance. I think it's there. So there are all of those, and if you think that there are things that aren't included, and I would have expected that to come back for the last 8-9 years that we've been working with the current definitions, because I'm not aware of many cases asking for reviews of the fact that you've given me no points whatsoever. The only difference where there might be is where someone is a homeowner and points haven't been awarded on that basis. But that there are some there's a very clear stance being taken in relation to people who do own homes, apart from in exceptional circumstances. But by all means, and after this meeting as well, come back to me with any cases that you don't think would or currently have no points and would be disadvantaged. Because I've struggled to think of many. The definition of what a housing need, and which incorporates welfare, social.
Second question: ex-armed services definition. Are we including Gurkhas? We have a very large Nepalese community, and their rights are not the same as ex-servicemen service people completely. And I'd like to think that our definition did include the Gurkha community in particular in our borough, considering we have a large Nepalese community.
That's a good point. And I'll speak to Rushmore, obviously, to see what their approach is. But no, I haven't thought of that.
Happy to work with you on that one in relation to the MOD. Trying to square the idea of the years. So we go to the workshop, we talk about 1 year, for obvious reasons, the debates that were had at that workshop. Obviously the consultation, the way you took it forward, 2 years, 3 years, and so on. The issue I've got is squaring that then with our dear leader's comments in the newspaper today, and that's not been first time he said this, but this idea that we must drive for economic growth, we must drive the borough forward, we must encourage people to come to the borough to work, which is all well and good, and not everybody shares that view, or has shared that view in the past. But if we're going to have that, not everybody, and this assumption that everybody's going to be a homeowner that moves here, we want a spread of people who will have needs if they come for work in Basingstoke. So their eligibility for housing in that context is important. If we want to drive for economic growth, that's one thing. Our ability to support a workforce that comes here is important. And if we take the schma and we take all the work we're doing on the housing side, on the plan side, we're going to have a huge young population and we're going to have a huge old population. The workforce issues are really apparent as part of the demographic trends we're facing. So that bit of work, I think, needs to be captured by yourselves in terms of where you draw this line. Because we could be cutting our nose off to spite our face in the context of we want to drive economically.
I'm still thinking of all of these. I originally started where you are, which was, yes, we want to attract business, so therefore we should say, if you're coming to get a job here, you should go on the waiting list. But actually, if you did go straight on the waiting list, you wouldn't get housed straight away. So you can't use going on the waiting list as a means of getting the job. People have to find, employers have to help them in other ways to get housed, either help with purchasing or help with the private rented sector. So whilst I was initially attracted to it, I'm not currently attracted, which means I haven't ruled it out, but I don't actually think that allowing people to go on the waiting list because they've got a job here will help them to come and get a job here. And the point about the workshop, I mean, we're just going to have to disagree on our memories of this. My memory of it was not that there was a strongly expressed view by a small number of councillors that 1 year was right. I did not think there was any attempt to get a consensus or a majority. So I will take full responsibility for it not being 1 year, because that wasn't what I picked up from that workshop. So if you're going to have to shoot somebody, you can shoot me, not the officers. But the debate will still be had. I mean, we can recognise that we didn't ask 1 year as an option. So, but I think
Totally respect what Councillor Golding is saying, but it's the issue of commuting and families commuting, and the issue of do you have to wait 5 years, 7 years, in the context of the debate you've been having, in the sense of you might be able to sustain commuting for 1 year, or you might be able to sustain it for 2 years, but we're just assuming that everybody who's going to get a job in Basingstoke can. There needs to be some flexibility there. We appreciate what's been said. This league table of naughtiness and the application of and testing of a league table of naughtiness, it's just this idea of, well, what do you do with offenders, ex-offenders? How do we deal with those issues? How do you deal with people who do come out, and as I just said here, in terms of mappers and in terms of other circumstances? What do we do then if you provide a test that it might well be objective in your mind, but if it's legally tested, isn't objective? How do you test the objectiveness legally of somebody challenging us over that definition of whether or not you consider them to be naughty and they consider themselves not to be? So the legal aspect of that just needs to be thought through and considered, I think. Please,
I mean, my reading of the legislation is that it's down to the local authority to set what it wants. I mean, there will be certain, obviously with reference to any equalities impact, and it couldn't be so Wednesbury unreasonable that no other local authority would adopt it. It would be prudent for any final proposed scheme to be run by, if not legal, then council, just to ensure that a definition or the policy as proposed is watertight. However, courts are proving very reluctant to intervene in overturning local authority policies when those policies have been framed in accordance with the legislation and the freedoms that they're allowed. That's a very technical response for you.
No, I appreciate that. And I think in terms of the Equalities Act and other issues that relate to rights and where people may draw a line in court to challenge, that's important. And Shelter's involvement in this in particular, in relation to perhaps current examples we could point to, let alone where we may go with this, where giving somebody rights or giving them a place on the register or accepting a duty to them does become an issue where we say no, and they actually do have a right because of them coming out of court or because of them having particular issues. So I just think that needs to be really carefully thought through if you're going to go down that road. In terms of this urgent bit and the definition of urgent, this is again, it's the banding of this, and again, a comment I'd like you to capture, please, is the sense of I want to see that far more understood in the way that others have said, yeah, critical, urgent, and so on. I think that the one-size-fits-all bit of that, I know you're trying to simplify it. I don't necessarily think simplifying it helps in the context of actually what we're driving at here. And it is one of those routines as well of what's the purpose. And I'm just conscious of the consultation. I'm conscious of what you've done. If you start with the premise that the open register is going to be too large, yes, our opening premise, we've got a too large a register. And then we say that supply, has got to be increased because it's inevitable. We haven't got a supply. One of the biggest issues we have in the town and in the borough is that we don't have a supply. Supply is hugely problematic. Then what you actually create, and what worries me about the consultation responses and the way that we interpret them, is that you inevitably bring out the worst prejudices not only in people but in stakeholders. Because everyone argues their own corner to get their people as part of your definitions. And they're going to go out to put other people off the register and off your definitions because it suits their... There's this sense of really balancing this because supply is tight, we know demand is great in the town, and if you're going to close the register, you're going to take 42% off of it, and that's what the report tells us, 42% of the total register could be removed. It's the context of this and where this all sits that worries me about this being a sound piece of work going forward. I want it to be, and I'm conscious of what you're driving at, Kate. I appreciate that. But I'm just conscious of what other people are arguing, and those RPs and those other ones are important. And finally, my final comment relates to regeneration. In the urgent category that you've done, if I go to 56 of 92, you talk about tenants being decanted from regeneration schemes. And it's not surprising that I'm raising this with you. I would not like to see that included in the way that it's included, because there will be people in those circumstances whose context is about the regeneration. It's about the fact that their house is being knocked down to be regenerated. It's about the context of that and wrapping them up with other competing urgent priorities. Their circumstances might be completely contextual to that regeneration. So how we deal with that, I think, needs to be carefully thought through. You're wrapping it all up. You're wrapping those people up in that same, with alongside what others have said, maybe absolute priority and critical need. But if we're knocking down a particular development because we want to regenerate it,
About 1% or 1 to 2% of the housing register at the moment meets that critical band, of whom regenerations form a part. Now, if you're saying that you want those to have that high level of priority, I'm saying they've got that. So are you telling me to give them less? Sorry.
What I'm saying is my experience currently of dealing with that issue is that it has been so complex and so difficult. I want to understand a different way of dealing with it that isn't related. Wrapping it up here I don't think is helping in terms of my experience and others' experience of the case where we've dealt with, particularly with the regeneration. And I'd like to explore that with yourselves to get it right, what you're saying, but also our experience of that. And I think that's something I'm registering a comment here that I would like to explore that, Chair, in the right way so that we do get it right. I'm not going to sit around the table tonight and do it with you, Kate, because I don't think that's fair on you. And it certainly is, precisely. But I think it's an issue I'm flagging up because we've experienced a considerable amount of casework in that area, and I want to explore it with you.
Thank you. Councillor James. Thank you. Councillor Bierman.
Thank you. Can I first concur with what Councillor Peach was saying about the 60k? I have great difficulty with that too. And so, I don't know where that's going to lead, but I certainly think that the 40 that was mentioned previously seems to me to have more validity. But I don't have statistics to back it up. I'd just like to revisit what was said at the beginning of this debate and what we're sort of going to formally capture as part of the conclusions from the committee, apart from individual comments. And I hope this question of people moving into the borough and having a job and needing a home will be something that there is a committee consensus on. I felt when I read the comments from respondents, your 400 odd and so on, that seemed to be a very clear message from those people, and I was heartened by the sort of things they were saying, that that we don't want people travelling long distances. We want people as far as possible to work to live near where they work. And there are all sorts of good reasons for doing that. And certainly if we're going to be in a position where we're encouraging yet more companies to come here and acknowledging that an offer of housing isn't going to be instantaneous, I think we need to more or less say, well, you can go on the list as a would-be tenant straight away, no mucking about. Yes, please do.
I think that it sort of indicates certainly how the consultation with the Code of Guidance is going, that there needs to be some recognition of strong employment. It's a case of what will be a strong employment and how long you need to have held it before you can go on the housing register. But certainly anything, I think when the consultation started, it was very much just focused on residency, and quite clearly the consultation on the Code of Guidance also makes very strong reference to family connections and employment reasons. So yeah, we need to see what that final code will look like, and we need to wrap that up with the comments that have come from here and from applicants as well. So it's a moving feast. Just hope that helps.
It does. I appreciate, I mean, certainly defining what a job is, if you're sort of a temp for a week in a bar or something, that really can't count, and it needs a bit of tidying up. But I'd like to think, I'm ready to be shot down, but if the chair feels that there is a mood for going in that direction strongly from the committee at large, then there's a clear steer and decision as far as we're able to decide anything. Oh yeah.
Well, would you like to put that then, Councillor Bierman? It doesn't have to be a motion as such, but as a committee comment, and then we can see whether everyone agrees.
Yes, well, basically that we should, where a reasonable establishment of an employment by an applicant is in being, that we should be putting them as a higher priority on the housing list. Oh, well, okay, yeah, okay, yes, yeah. So yes, no, you're quite right, yes.
If it assists, Appendix 2, what was actually stated in the consultation on the statutory code, so it's, Appendix 2, yeah? Second bullet point, employment in the district, for example, where an applicant or member of their household is currently employed in the district and has worked there for a certain number of years. Now, we will need to bottom out what we feel is a certain number of years, but that's certainly the direction that the statutory code is likely to go. If we're going to divert from the code, we'd have to have very strong reason why we were doing that. So I think your comments and the views of the committee are being reflected, certainly in the statutory guidance as well, if it gives you...
Well, it's a certain number of years thing that I have an issue with. But I mean, there might not be consensus on it.
Instant employment, so from day one you go on the housing, or you have to, in village connections, some village areas might have a view on that. If you've worked in a local place in a village, is that really making you a strong local person compared to someone who's lived there for a number of years? These are the sorts of debates that are being weighed up.
Understood. The point is that if somebody is clearly, weeks don't count. I'm suggesting that years is wrong. No, I would certainly put it nearer a year, something like that, because if you're talking about villages, their financial and economic well-being also depends partly on the companies. Now, if the people who are living in the village in Overton, is he still there? Yeah. Are not interested in the jobs, therefore people are coming from further afield, then it seems to me reasonable then that the people who have committed to come to that opportunity should be supported, not necessarily rewarded, but should be supported. And I'm saying if they have to wait 2 years and then beyond, because you're saying 2 years is the starting point, and then you've got to wait after that, and that could be another 3 years or something, it starts getting unsupportive. And there's been a lot of travel going on in that meantime. So I think, sort of plucking it a bit out of the air and accepting that we've not established what a qualifying employment would be and for how long and what type and all the rest of it. But the thrust of it, to my mind, should be something like a year and something like a firmly established employment role. And of course that could come to an end any time if the company goes bust or they decide to sack somebody because they're not performing. But you can go on with the ifs and buts forevermore.
Councillor Harvey, you had your hand up.
Thank you, Chair. Just thinking this through in terms of the localism agenda, we've now got DCLG saying that SMARTs have got to be economic growth led now. Zero net migration is dead. Well and truly murdered by Eric Pickles. It is finished. They are driving now the local plans down an economic growth agenda. The result of that, in terms of justifying economic growth locally, is that, and you're not going to get a house in a year or two, you're going to be on a waiting list as with everybody else. The point being, would that person turn down the job? Would that employer be at a disadvantage because of the policy? The issue is dealing with local unemployment and making sure local people are taking jobs and have the opportunity for work in terms of that, but also that we're likely, as we always have had in Basingstoke, to have significant growth that leads to the need to bring people into the town. That's what the leader said in the paper today. The dear leader has set a direction of travel for us. So I want to see joined up policy here. It's no point us sat in P&I saying one thing, no good of the DCLG saying one thing, if then the housing policy is drifting off in another. It's just joining it up, really. And it's working it in common sense.
Before we go any further, it's that time of the night, I'm afraid. Is someone happy to move suspension of standing orders? Everyone agree? Right, we carry on then. Councillor Golding.
Just say, I think it would be helpful if the committee did resolve that we needed to include people with a certain employment connection as having a housing, as being eligible to go on the housing register within the same priority as other people in housing need. And I would be happy for the committee to indicate that they, if that's what the majority feel, that they were in favour of a relatively short period of employment rather than a period of years. But I think to try and tie us down to a specific period tonight till we've had a chance to register it would be a mistake. So I'm very happy if you indicate the direction of travel and give us a chance to work through the details and see what the guidance is when it comes out. That would be, as far as I'm concerned, that would be.
Is everyone happy with that as a committee view? I can see Councillor Parker's hands up. Do you want to add something, Councillor Parker?
Yes, sorry, Chair, I was indicating earlier, and it's in direction or not, or on a route master for this particular point. At the workshop, my recollection of the group that I was part of was that we felt 12 months was the relevant time. And we were, I think it was, well, the flip charts were taken away, and certainly I think people can look back on that. It was more a shorter period, not months, but certainly minimum of 12 months, but not 5 or 3 years.
So we've basically had two views put forward. One would be a year, and one would be to not specify at the moment and to carry that forward to the workshop and further discussions. So I need a committee view on that. Do we carry it forward and discuss it at the workshop? Are we happy with that? Right, thank you. That is a committee view then. I have one more name on the list, which is Councillor Waldridge.
Staying on this subject of local connection, if I just give a scenario and just it's illustrating really how this 3-year thing just for me potentially could not work. If we had somebody, for example, who'd been in, the borough maybe for sort of 18 months, 2 years, and then they became, maybe they were in private rented or they even own their own property, and they became critically ill, or what a family member did, to the point where they're severely disabled. They had, severe medical issues which couldn't be met through private rented accommodation because of the, adaptations required. How is that going to fit in with this local connection of 3 years? Because even if, for example, we took a homelessness application and did a referral back to another local authority, if they'd, for example, been in there for 2 years, 8 months, and the other local authority had the same sort of local connection procedure of, 3 years, this family could potentially not be housed anywhere at all. So I think we need to be very, very careful before we jump in at this 3-year local connection thing. It may be something we want to discuss at the workshop, but I just wanted that scenario registered because it might help and in an understanding of this real issue of 3 years local connection. Sorry.
Councillor Parker.
I think it's a very valid point, Chair, and the other consideration is, in line with that, is the care plan that they may be already established with the local health authority and then have to move away into a new health authority and, you know, make those new connections. I think that's got to be a very important factor.
Thank you. I think the officers have noted that. So if we can just summarise where we are at the moment, then if I hand over to the officer.
Right. In summary, the committee have noted that individual comments will be recorded and reviewed for further consideration. The committee's resolved that where a firmly established employment role, where it's established that there's a firm employment role, they should be eligible for the register, the period to be agreed at some future date following the workshop. And that the committee would like a further workshop so they have the opportunity to shape the recommendations before going on final report to Housing and Environment Committee, probably sometime January, February.
I mean, I'm not sure whether it's capturing the fact that we wanted the employment period to be shorter rather than longer. That's the missing bit there, I would say. The thrust of the conclusions was that it should be sooner rather than later, and that, I mean, yes, that the precise period is still to be established at a future workshop, but that it should be more rapid rather than longest term.
Yes, I'll be happy to.
So if I add period to be agreed, but committee would recommend sooner rather than later. Does that suit the committee? Shorter rather than longer. Does that suit committee?
Councillor James.
And I know you're picking up on the individual comments, but in general, lots of people across the parties, different parties, had concerns about bad behaviour, and I think that needs to be in some ways captured as a committee, because everyone was a bit concerned as to how that was going to work. I don't think that's been captured.
So are we saying we want that as a committee comment, that the committee is concerned at the implications of a bad behaviour clause and wants to look at that further?
Okay. What we might suggest then is making that a very specific topic for exploration at the workshop. Well, not exclusively that topic, but a suggestion that that should be one of the topics. Yeah?
Right. Thank you. I think that's it then. I think we've captured individual comments and committee comments. So we can move on to paper C. Before we begin, does anyone, I'm loath to do this because time is marching on, but is anyone in need of a very, very short break before I move on to the next paper? Is everyone happy? In which case, may I hand the chair over for 2 minutes so that I can leave the room just very, very briefly? Right, looks like we are having a break of a couple of minutes then. Right, members, thank you. I know we're still missing a couple of members, but I think if we make a start, please. So we're on to paper C. Once again, the report is for noting rather than any recommendations. So if we hand over to Di, thank you. Councillor Parker.
Sorry, Chair, can I just come back on that point? The purpose of this report was in response to another OSCOM asking for it to be referred to this committee. It's not been asked by the Housing Environment Committee to be referred to the officers. And I don't understand how this isn't taking the standard format whereby this committee is being asked to add its comments.
I anticipate that once we've been through the report and also the technical appendix, there are likely to be some comments. There may be further work coming out of it, and I'm quite happy to look at that. If I could go through the introduction, then maybe that will become a bit clearer.
Councillor James.
It was a new way of working. What happened is at P&I, there was real concerns about this issue, and it was referred to this committee to do a piece of work. And I'm not sure the piece of work was just to note this report. And I'm concerned that we've had lots of reports tonight that have asked us to note. And if we want to note something, we could just, we could actually just stay at home and read the report, or you could put it on the members' bulletin. I mean, I have concerns that this is a way that you're moving to, to. And if that's the case, just send me the report and I'll send you my comment. And there's no point in sending the comments because you're not going to do anything with them. So I don't like this new style, and I don't know where this has come from.
It isn't a new style. Unfortunately, it's quite coincidental. You've had three reports headed up the same. In terms of the report that Di's going to present, it's absolutely, as you say, it was a referral from P&I. A piece of work to try and understand some of the issues was asked for. That's what Di has done. It's up to the committee what they want to do with the information that Di then presents.
Okay, thank you, Di.
Okay, I just wanted to do a quick introduction to the paper. It is a technical paper. It's in response to a referral from P&I Ofcom, which considered the housing needs and affordability assessment in June of this year. The analysis will form part of an annual update of that document. The data comes from the Ministry of Justice. Up until last Thursday, I would have said this is the most up-to-date data. However, last Thursday, we got a new release. However, looking at the headline results for this new release of data, I don't think there's any reason to believe that the conclusions in the report are going to change. Just to give a bit of background about the original analysis that was presented to P&I. At the time the analysis was presented, the Ministry of Justice, who own and publish the data, published headline statistics on mortgage claims and orders, and landlord claims and orders, including all of the private and social sector, and the claims and orders being at the beginning of the possession process. The Ministry of Justice also calculated a broad rate per 1,000 households to try and put the data in some sort of context. Since then, the Ministry of Justice has released the data in its raw form, which allows much greater detail than was presented to P&I back in June. It's allowed us to look at mortgage, private landlord, accelerated landlord and social sector tenures. And it's allowed us to look at the different stages of possession action, from claims, orders, suspended orders, warrants and actual possessions. So there's a lot more detail here than was presented to P&I. What I've tried to do in the technical appendix is to bring the analysis presented to P&I up to date, rolling it forward to include the latest data. And there are 3 graphs in the technical appendix that do that. Graphs 3, 9 and 13. I've also aimed to try and answer the question posed by the referral from P&I by analysing the raw data, to examine not just the start of the possession proceedings, but also to look at the end result, the warrants and the actual possessions. We've had to update the rate per 1,000 households. The Ministry of Justice no longer produce that as a headline statistic, so we've had to do that ourselves. And also I've taken the opportunity to use census data and the tenure split from the census data to analyse the private sector and the social sector in a lot more detail than we've previously been able to do. There's just two errors that I need to point out to you at this particular point in the report. One is paragraph 4.10. The last sentence of this paragraph says 58 actual possessions. That's incorrect. The number is 26. And also in the technical appendix, graph 7, there is some text underneath graph 7 that says graph 6, but it should be said it's 4. If I could just read to you very quickly the conclusion from the report. Sorry. Oh, sorry. Okay. Yes, the amendment is underneath the graph. The first paragraph of text refers to Basingstoke and Dean data in graph 6. That should read graph 7. It refers to the graph above. I just wanted to read some of the paragraphs from the conclusion. This is paragraph 6.1.4. Just to point out that in the private rented sector, the increase in possession action is driven by an increase in the use of accelerated possession action over the last 2 years. This has resulted in a higher rate of private landlord possession action than all the borough's neighbouring districts. However, the higher rate must be seen in the context of the number of claims, orders, warrants and possessions involved, given that there are around 8,000 households in the private rented sector. In the social sector, the number of claims and orders has increased. This has contributed significantly to the high level of overall social landlord possession activity in the borough. However, around 70% of all orders in the social sector are in fact suspended. The number of actual social sector possessions has stayed relatively stable even during the economic downturn. This appears to indicate that the increase in the initial stages of possession action is not translating into an increase of actual possessions. A couple of final points. Just to reiterate the point made in the technical appendix about the sensitivities around calculating a rate for overall stock or tenure when the number of properties in that stock or tenure is so large. And just one more point I'd like to make before I'll open up to questions. As I've said, this is a technical paper, but reference that I've made in the paper to relatively small numbers does not seek to minimise the social aspects of this issue. And I would never lose sight of the effect that just one possession order can have on just one household. You may feel the report is quite clinical. The style is in keeping with the housing needs assessment, and I felt it was important to really unpick all of the different elements to this data first, and not to preempt the direction the committee wants to take or to do further research at this stage until you've had a chance to have a look at the data.
Thank you, Di. Questions? Councillor Harvey's hand is up.
Thank you, Chair. As being one of the members that sat through P&I when Di presented the original reports and the material that prompted this, that was an exceptional piece of work, and it was one of the best report officer reports I've read in many, many years, because of what it showed us in the way that it was presented. the way that you've added to this die is important, I think, because what you're showing us here, and the questions I've got relate around, in a sense, the statistics here and the comparison to the national figures. Because appreciating you commented here about all other local districts and the relationship to the other districts, we are so out of sync with, I think, the rest of Hampshire, and quite a lot of Berkshire to go with it. But it's also being out of sync nationally, I think, that I want to draw attention to. And it's those 614, 615 and 616, those paragraphs that relate to you trying to draw out the conclusions, if you like, and the statistics that you've got there played back against the earlier paragraphs. I try and find them now because I had them a moment ago. 417 and 418, which again just underlines the issue. The question I've got is the why bit, because you've shown us we've got a problem, we know we've got an issue, we know something is going on both in the private sector and the social sector significantly. The missing bit of the puzzle for me is the why. So going forward from this, I want us to capture, if we can, and the question to yourself is, your work going forward from here, to capture the why bit, to drill into on the private rented sector why, but also the social. I can assume because of conversations I've had with social landlords in relation to the bedroom tax, and in relation to other areas where they're using possession orders as tools, and the problems that that's creating. But from your point of view, the research that you can do to answer the why question, and that's my question, how do you take this forward on a why point of view?
I think the why question is vitally important. There was so much more in this data than was presented to P&I. And as I said in the introduction, I really didn't want to preempt anything at this particular stage until we'd had this discussion, and I understand that what I'm giving you is context, but not necessarily cause and effect. The data has led, I think, to two particular conclusions. That the private rented sector is, and these numbers are relative, that there has been an increase in private rented sector possession activity, largely because of the accelerated landlord action. And in terms of the social sector, we've got an increase in claims and suspended orders, not necessarily outright orders, but suspended orders. And that's why I said in the introduction there may be further investigation that we do need to do. But when I was putting all of this data together, I didn't really want to preempt what you might say and start following a particular line of inquiry against comparing with any other local authority or looking at any one element of these when there might be issues that you wanted to pull out. So yes, I totally agree. I haven't gone into cause and effect necessarily. That might be the next piece of work.
One small comeback on that. I mean, yeah, I appreciate what you're saying. Obviously, we have a very large private rented sector in Basingstoke. That's evident. Nonetheless, the proportions, as you say, the relative is incredibly clear from your statistics. The CAB, Money Lifeline, those other agencies that are dealing with credit and debt issues, they're a part of this, and I think the evidence we need to gather needs to come from them as well. And again, it links to the stuff we talked about with all the payday lenders, but that aside, this point is about the issue of the social issue, I think, in the private rented sector and in the social rented sector, where we're seeing a significant overlap with debt issues and credit issues. And with the issue I've got, and I want to explore this, is where the social landlords are now using this because of the bedroom tax and others. I'm not going to say weapon, but that's the wrong way. It's a tool, it's a mechanism over residents in terms of arrears and other issues. They take it so far. And in one question, how much does it cost to take somebody to court? A couple of £100. They're still doing that. Now, obviously, we see a significant number of that being. Some of these are vulnerable residents who can't afford a couple of £100 to sit inside a court and be told, and then have not. Yeah, and it's that sense that then it traps them. So there are a number of social issues, I think, here that are coming out in our casework that is anecdotal, but I think more importantly in the experience of other agencies that we need to drill into to get a much better understanding of this. And then the question begs, really, and this is a question for the Cabinet member going forward, there needs to be some policy outcomes of where this borough, because it can't do everything, but we can influence some of this, and where we can influence that, I'd like to see some policy development along those lines.
Thank you, Councillor Harvey. Councillor James.
Picking up from that, I think it's essential in referring this work back to P&I. The question was why are landlord repossession claims higher in Basingstoke than other areas? And I think we need to actually answer that question for P&I because we've been tasked with doing that. I also, because and I know you sort of picked out the bits from the conclusion, but the reality was, in relation to what we were presented with in P&I, was it was really stark. We were much higher than the national figure, and we need to understand why that is. Can I ask, if there are that many people that are going to court in relation to possessions, where does the VPP, the Vulnerable Persons Protocol, fit into this? Why are so many people going to court? And I would like to know as well, what is the cost of a possession order, and how that impacts on those people going to court? That's 2 questions. I've got some more questions as well.
I'm afraid I can't offhand answer the question about the cost or the Vulnerable Persons Protocol. As I said, I think there may be another piece of work coming out of that. I would have to refer to do more work on in terms of the cost. The Vulnerable Persons Protocol I'll have to pick up with housing colleagues. Can you remind me of the first question again, please, Councillor James? I can't remember what it was.
It wasn't a question, sorry, it was just a comment to say, I think we were tasked in housing to look at why, and I think we need to answer that. I think it's important in relation to where we go forward in policy terms from planning. We understand the why.
Yes, I agree. I think with the data analysis, we know what is driving it, but yes, it's the cause and effect that Councillor Harvey was referring to that we haven't done yet, and yes, I fully appreciate that. I was just hoping that with the more detailed data analysis, at least it would give us a platform to move forward with the issue.
And also the other issue in relation to that, we are predominantly using the private sector now to house people because there isn't the supply of affordable housing that we're not building. I'd like to understand why there is an increased use of accelerated possession in the private sector and why that is so at odds with the national figures. I think that's a really big piece of work to understand that.
Yes, I haven't got the answer to that. It is the next stage of the piece of work. Although in numeric terms, the accelerated landlord possessions, by the time it gets to actual possession, the numbers are relatively few, yet the accelerated possession is definitely driving the private sector. So that's the next piece of work I think we need to do, to look at that.
Thank you. Councillor Parker.
Thank you, Chair. I certainly want to join others in noting the amount of information that's been contained in the report. But in terms of questions, this was why I was so keen that we couldn't just stay with the recommendation on the paper. We need, as a committee, to certainly, I would say, commission further work, but not necessarily data work. We've now got the data. We need to, as a local authority, understand how is it that we have arrived at this situation. We can all guess at it. We can all start to put signposts up, and that's not even choosing to enter into the political arena. I want to ask one specific question of the officer, if I may, and I'm going to do that by apologising possibly for perhaps not finding it in all the data, or not being able to relate one of the very good colour graphs, and I do thank you for colour graphs. I've sat in so many committees where I've been asked to follow different shades of grey, that's been impossible. So what I wanted just to ask was, and refer to page 65 of 92, referring particularly to paragraph 614, the last sentence, which brings us to note that we've got this figure of around 8,000 households in total in the private sector. Was there other comparative numbers in the other authorities of, that we can correlate with that, and maybe you'll tell me which slide it's on.
Yes, that 8,000 is the census figures, 2011 census, and the table of tenure split for all of the local authorities that we've compared to is at the back of the technical appendix. That's page... It's the last page of the report.
Well, it's getting late, and I apologise. But what I was trying to identify, and you maybe need to do some hand-holding here, we're saying that in the report that Basingstoke and Dean Borough Council have 8,000 households in the private rented sector. Can we find out what Rushmore has, or out of this?
Yes, the table at the back of the report shows the total private rented column, which includes renting from landlord or letting agency and renting from other. And Basingstoke and Dean is around about 8,000 households. West Berkshire could be considered to be the most similar. That's just got over 8,500. And that table gives all the different households in particular tenures from the 2001 census.
Thank you very much for that. That in itself is very informative and something that we need to, as an authority, study very hard and take, I think, possibly soft facts from that information, because we still come out highest in the number of the private sector possession actions. So there's got to be a real important message here. And Chair, I don't know what to suggest. I think other committee members know the pattern of work for the committee in regard to what we ask officers to do. I think maybe I have that. But I think we need to be looking at how we can assess the impact of the statistics that we've been presented with tonight, and put in some measures that may change things.
Thank you, Councillor Parker. I think Di has already stated that she's going further into this, and there's more work to be done on this. I think it probably is, looking around the committee, is it the committee view that we would like analysis of why the figures are the way they are? We can see that they are the way they are. Would we like an analysis of why? Councillor Taylor?
This is the question I was going to ask, because I'm slightly puzzled about all this. I mean, I fully appreciate, actually this is a very good report, and I understand the statistics, and especially the ones at the back, which does it per 1,000 households, so that we can directly compare the different areas. But it doesn't actually tell us anything more than what they knew at P&I, really. And the question was, we're to say why, as we've been saying. So we've got to find some pertinent questions to ask. And I mean, I don't even know if our figures are higher because our tenants are particularly bad because they fail to pay their rent, or because our landlords are particularly quick in taking action. And these are the questions that we've got to somehow find out. I mean, I can't think of another one, but I'm sure there must be some really pertinent questions we can ask that can delve much deeper. I mean, do we come up with those questions? Because we're the committee, we've been asked to find out why. I don't think we've got anywhere yet, have we? Except we've just said, well, you're right.
we've got a few hands up, I think, in answer to that. I think Councillor Waldridge, your hand was first.
Well, I think we have had one question, the role of the VPP, and I would echo Councillor James's question about seeing what the role of the VPP is, and especially with the socially rented sector. Are these, that's been set up to hopefully stop, these the RSLs going to court, and to act before they go to court. So that's, is that still working effectively? So that's one. Another one which I, as a housing professional, would query is, and this is linked to the private renting sector, is the role that this council is taking in, and I know Kate's team do an excellent job in terms of preventative work, in terms of tenants who have been served Section 21's notice, but other local authorities. The question is, at what point do we treat these people as homeless? Because other local authorities will treat tenants as homeless and take a homeless application, and in some cases enable them to go into bed and breakfast if they so choose at the expiry of the Section 21, rather than waiting for the landlord to go for possession. And if the code of guidance, if you read it carefully, it does say, unless there's good reasons and the landlord isn't going to go on for possession, that you should, take into account the tenant's wishes on that. So I think that's something that needs looking into. That what we do is practice here at this council in comparison to other local authorities, and you'll see slightly different practices. So, and that might give us some answers. I'm not saying it will give us all answers, but it might give us some. So, those are two things I would suggest that we will look into. I'm sure there are plenty more. I mean, I think possibly a survey out to the private landlords who have served possession orders, just to find out why they have done will be a very good starting point. So, and then that'll give us a flavour of. I'm not telling you how to do your job. I'm sure you do it far better than me, but just an idea really, and we'll give some more data, but it'll be more quantitative data rather than just figures. So that's my thoughts on it. But I would say, Di, it's an excellent report, really informative and very interesting. So thank you very much.
Thank you. I can see that Di is taking fairly extensive notes as people raise questions, but it might be helpful actually if Tracy could just read back the questions that she's recorded. I can see the hand waving from the portfolio holder.
To Di before. As I read the paper, Dan, the early analysis was per 1,000 households total, which seemed to me a fairly meaningless thing, although you pinched it from the Department of Justice, because our mix between mortgage, private rented, social rented would be very different. But towards the end, you seem to be per 1,000 in the relevant sector. So I found those the most meaningful ones. And unless anybody wants to disagree with me, I think it would be helpful if you carried that, if that's the statistical analysis that you're trying to interpret, not the per 1,000 households in total, which did seem to me, a bit like dividing apples by cheese or something. So unless anyone disagrees, it seems to me it's the 1,000 in the relevant sector that's the thing we ought to be working out, why we've got higher numbers than other people.
Yes, I think that is the most relevant analysis. That does present us with a bit of a challenge, because the 2011 census gives us a perfect tenure split. So we'll have to look at how we can possibly roll the tenures forward to take that into account in subsequent years. But I think there will be a way of doing that, so I take that on board.
Yes. Councillor Taylor, you had your hand up. Have you finished with your... I see. Councillor Bierman.
Thank you. It does seem a bit like a sort of clutching at straws exercise to find the reasons and so on. And so I throw in a straw without any particular knowledge or expertise. But I just wonder whether there's a link with buy-to-let. And I say that because I look upon this might be completely wrong, as I say, it's just sort of seat-of-the-pants stuff. I look upon Reading as being a more mature town in terms of the experience possibly in private letting. And it seems to me that in the, I was going to say a short time I've lived in this area, but it's not that short now, that sort of suddenly there was this great boom in buy-to-let, and all sorts of people were being encouraged to buy-to-let who didn't necessarily have the same tradition and knowledge as you might have in some of the more older and established towns. And particularly the involvement then with letting agencies, and there might be a different type of approach in the different settlements, and I just wonder whether that might be a straw that one might clutch at, that's all.
Yeah, I was just going to say it might be a relevant straw because part of the context in the report does actually observe that some landlords made themselves have their property repossessed by the mortgage lender, and that is why they are taking action against the tenant, because they need that asset back, and that could be involved in buy-to-let. So I think it is an important point.
Thank you, Councillor Parker.
The one thing that does concern me is that with regard to the private sector landlord, is that as a local authority we've had various initiatives that's assisted that development, and if there is a situation, and I think maybe we've still got a couple of schemes that still continue where we're making grants available for improvement to properties and make them available to rent. If there is a suggestion that within this locality there is an increase in earlier repossession than should be the case, then this is a social concern with regard to that. And I think part of this also is with regard to the system where the payment of the benefit to the landlord has been ceased, and it goes to the applicant. When I've had to bring just to the discussion, when I've been dealing with housing needs situations, and the housing officers have pointed to the deposit bond scheme, you could take that around the town, and there's no agency, landlord agents that will even look at it, purely on the basis that the result that the landlord's not going to get the rental payment direct.
Thank you, Councillor Aldridge.
Thank you. Just another thought, really, is because another explanation may be that in recent years we haven't had any temporary accommodation. We got rid of all our council temporary accommodation, so a lot of the more vulnerable residents are, when they become homeless, or even before they're homeless, are going down the private rent route, and therefore a lot of them possibly might have rent arrears, which previously might have been in temporary accommodation, and have more support to deal with those. So it'd be interesting to see how many of these accelerated possessions were people with rent arrears, and some of the reasons behind that. I know that's gathering more data, but that might give us some clues as to why all this is happening as well. And so that's another possible option of exploring it, because other local authorities still have temporary accommodation, so that possibly might explain it. It might not.
I'd just like to set it in context a little bit by going back to the numbers. At the back of the technical appendix, I think it's page 88 and 92. That shows the number of claims, orders, warrants and possessions for the private rented sector. And as I said at the beginning of the presentation, looking at the numbers, given the size of the private rented sector, there may be the assumption that the numbers are relatively small, and I'm not commenting on that, because, as I said, every possession is vitally important. But just to put the increase in accelerated possessions in context, that overall for the private rented sector in 2011 is 125 claims, 102 orders, 53 warrants and 33 possessions.
Councillor James.
Picking up on that table, but if you look at that, I mean, that's, for me, that I find that really concerning and not reassuring in a sense. It's, if you look at Reading, and if you look at what the makeup of Reading would be in relation to the private sector, just imagine how large they have, and they're a university town with a lot of young people. It's 155, and ours is 125. I mean, for me, that, and it did in P&I, raises alarm bells. And so what we need to know, and it really is the why, and I guess once you've told us what the why is, it's also then the next question is going to be is what can we do about it, but also what are the implications as a result of the why. So I think we need to know why. Then the next question is what does that, what are the implications of that for us, and then what do we need to do in policy terms. What I find worrying is that policy is being developed at P&I, and what we need to have done, or really we should have done, is done this much earlier as a piece of work to then have informed housing policy that informs P&I. But and also this needs to inform obviously our housing strategy. But this is a good piece of scrutiny, and it's a start in you know. And I think this is the sort of work that we should be doing as a committee. The other question I had is, sorry, and is also to say that I think, you know, we need to be talking to stakeholders as to what they think the why is. You know, just ask, why do you think this is happening?
Thank you. Di, did you have a comment on that? I couldn't tell from if you wanted to say something.
Yes, it was. In terms of the numbers, there have been a number of reasons that have been given as to the cause, and it may not be one particular reason. It could be a combination of those, and we're not necessarily going to be able to say that all of the claims are attributable to one thing, or that one of those particular issues has contributed to a number of the particular claims. So I think it'll be a combination of all of the things that you've talked about, but it may not be one of those things that's driving it all.
Thank you. Are we happy then for Tracy to sum up for us?
Right. If I could start with the sort of overarching view of the committee, was that you need to understand why this is happening in Basingstoke and Deane and why it's higher than other boroughs and the national average. So that's the starting point. And then underneath that, there are a number of specific issues that would need to be examined in order to contribute to that. So we've got debit and credit issues and how they're impacting, the perspective of other agencies and stakeholders like the CAB and Moneyline, the role of the VPP, the relationship with homeless applications and legislation, that the relevant sector to use as a comparison is per thousand in the relevant sector, the impact of the buy-to-let market, and then having considered those impacts on the overarching question, what in the way of policy development do we need in order to mitigate and influence those impacts?
The vulnerabilities of the people who are in, some analysis of which tenants have been evicted, or how vulnerable they are, and are they in arrears, just to understand that side of things if we can, because it might give some clues, possibly the nature of it. What's the word I'm looking for? You understand what I want, don't you? Yeah. The profile, yeah.
Councillor Parker.
Well, it's just to make sure, Chair, that the comments that have been listed there can form part of the meeting minutes, and that potentially they are shared with the Housing Environment Committee or some way of reporting back. Sorry, the P&I. The Planning and Infrastructure Committee, who first tasked us with the work, and it's effectively work in progress. And thank you very much to the officer, and thank you, Chair, for your patience.
If everyone can just, sorry, bear with us 1 second. I think Tracy would just like to make a comment.
Yeah, so in answer to the final point that's made, the points that I read out will form the resolution of this committee and will be formally recorded. Yes, we can share that with the P&I committee. When would you like some of this to come back? Would you like me to ask Di?
Yes.
Can I scope the work out properly and come back to you with a realistic date, please?
Thank you very much. Thank you everyone for a very constructive evening's discussion. Thank you very much. On behalf of the committee, may I thank the officers as well. And particularly remember a couple of the officers have been here, I think 3 times in the last month as well. So it's worth remembering. Thank you.